In this course, I'll take you from a complete beginner to becoming an expert in Claude Cowork. Claude Cowork is quickly becoming one of the most important tools to master for knowledge workers, kind of like Claude Code already is for engineers. With Cowork, non-technical professionals and business owners can start using AI agents to automate real day-to-day tasks across marketing, sales, operations, or any other business department. And when deployed and used across a business, it can entirely transform the way a business operates. So in this video, I'll cover everything you need to know to leverage this powerful tool for yourself or your business. So whether you're a founder, a marketer, someone in sales, or just a professional who wants to get way more done and stay ahead in AI, this is the course for you. So here's what we're going to cover. First, I'll show you quickly how to set up Cowork and give you a quick overview. Then I'll cover file access and projects, which are important new concepts to understand in order to use Cowork efficiently. Then I'll cover connectors, MCP, browser use, computer use, and dispatch. After understanding these fundamentals, I'll go in depth in what I believe is the most important feature to master in Cowork, which are skills. I'll show you what they actually are, how they work, when to build them, but more importantly, how to actually build, test, and improve them efficiently, which is the key to making Cowork actually useful. Then we'll cover plugins, show you what they actually are, how to leverage them to give Claude specific expertise. I'll show you how to build your own ones and why plugins could mean a fundamental shift in the SaaS landscape. Then I'll cover using and building agents in Claude Cowork in order to run bulk tasks and complex workflows autonomously. Then I'll cover scheduled tasks and scheduled skills that allow your AI agents to run automations and tasks autonomously and show you some practical use cases to automate some operational tasks. And then after you understand all the major feature, I want to make this practical and show you how to use Cowork and skills to automate a significant part of your marketing tasks, from copywriting to ideation, research analytics, and visual asset generation. I also cover how to use Cowork to automate sales tasks like prospecting, outreach, research, qualification, call preps, and follow-ups. And lastly, I'll show you how to set up what I call an AI operating system or a second brain inside of Cowork that gives you and your team persistent context and memory across every chat you open. And this can scale across your team and makes Cowork and all of the features that are covered here above far more powerful. I'll also add the timestamps with the chapters here below. So if you're already familiar with some of these concepts, you can skip to the part that's most relevant to you. Now, Claude Cowork at the time of filming is currently available on the Claude Pro, Team, or Enterprise account. It's not available on the free tier yet. And second, it's available on the Claude desktop app, not in a browser yet. So it's desktop only. So once you've downloaded Claude Cowork and you're minimum on a Pro account, you'll see a second tab here next to chat, which is called Cowork. Now, although the Claude Cowork interface might look very similar to the original chat interface, Cowork is actually far more powerful because under the hood, Cowork is actually an AI agent. It can do much more than just questions and answers. You can see that we also have the Claude Code tab, which behind the hood works very similar to Cowork, but has some extra features that make it even more powerful. But this mostly is for engineering tasks. For most non-engineering tasks, Cowork is really all you need, has a more intuitive UI, and for businesses, it can be a superior setup because it has permission settings and collaboration features built in to safely roll this out and start using these agents across your company. Also, once you start understanding Claude Cowork and the concepts, Claude Code becomes a lot more intuitive too, because much of what we're doing is exactly the same. So once you start using Cowork more and more and you want to use some of the extra capabilities, using Claude Code becomes easy. And I'll show you some examples of this later in this video too. Now, Claude Cowork was only launched a couple of months ago, and Anthropic is trying to make Claude Cowork the Claude Code for non-technical knowledge workers. So this tool is and will become more capable by the week. So at the time of you watching this video, some things might already look a little bit different in the UI. However, these fundamental concepts that I will cover will still apply. Now, the first thing you'll notice in Cowork is that you can give Claude access to a folder on your computer here. This means a couple of things. First, you can give Claude access to real context about your business or your project with a single folder select. For example, here I've selected a folder with my YouTube transcripts, a document on my ICP, and my YouTube strategy. So anytime I want to use Claude to help me with any YouTube related task like research, ideation, or helping me write the script, I can just give it access to the folder and it will already have all of the context without me copying and pasting all the time. So if I now ask Claude something like, can you help me ideate on some new YouTube videos based on my YouTube strategy? So you can see Claude instantly has access to all of these context documents like the YouTube strategy and ICP. It checked what videos I've already published this year. And based on that, it gives me 10 actual relevant video ideas according to my strategy. Claude can now control your computer, etc. But second, in contrast to previous projects in chat, Claude doesn't just read these documents here. It can also create, edit, update any file directly into that same folder, including presentations, CSV sheets, Google Docs, and other file formats. So if I actually generate a script or a presentation for my video, I can directly save them in the folder. And also when I make changes to my YouTube strategy, you can directly update the strategy doc. And this is really why this feature is so important, because no matter how good these LLMs and these AI agents become, context is really the key to get good outputs with AI, and file access will give Claude Cowork persistent context around your project, your business, and your tasks in every new chat you start. Now, later I'll show you plenty of examples of what context documents to use and when, but just understanding the importance of this feature is enough for now. Now, let me quickly cover Projects, which is a new, updated version of the old Claude Chat project. Now, you can imagine if you have a lot of different projects or tasks or departments in your business, and for a specific type of tasks, you want to have a specific type of context, you can make a project for each. For example, for my YouTube related tasks, I've set up a project here that's connected to my YouTube folder with all of these YouTube related context documents. And as you can see, this YouTube project is already connected to my YouTube folder here. So in this project, I don't even have to manually select the folder each time. I can also see all of the chats I had around YouTube tasks organized below. And besides that, every project can now also have specific memory. So I can tell Claude something to memorize that's specifically relevant for this project. For example, here I have a rule to always mimic my tone of voice from the transcript when helping me write scripts. And you can do this by just telling Claude, please help me memorize this, and it will automatically save it there. You can also see scheduled tasks related to this project, which I'll cover later in this video, and we can give it specific instructions, more or less like we did with custom GPTs or old Claude projects like a system prompt. So how do you set up these projects? You can just go here to the sidebar, click on projects, create new project, and there you get three options. You can go and start from scratch where you add the context manually. You can import it from an old Claude chat project, or you can use an existing folder, which in my case I would do. I would then select the YouTube folder on my computer, add the name, and some instructions for Claude on how to work inside of this project. For example, you're my YouTube assistant. You will help me with any YouTube related tasks, from ideation to packaging to intro writing to helping me with scripts, presentations, and more. I would give it some context on the context files it has access to. You'll have access to my YouTube folder with all my past YouTube transcripts, so you get an idea of what my last videos were about. And in order to mimic my tone of voice when you use it for script writing, also you have access to my YouTube strategy doc and ICP document. And I could also add an instruction like any asset we create in these chats, like presentations, scripts, please save them directly into the folder. We can add any extra files we want, and then we just create, and we have our project set up. Now, again, this is going to require a little bit of effort when you just get started and figuring it out, but these are really important features to start using and experimenting with, because this will make the outputs of your AI, however good these models get, far better and easier. Now, all the way at the end of this video, I'll take this up a notch and show you how to set up an entire AI operating system where large amounts of context, like you can see here, hundreds or thousands of documents, can be stored and used in Claude Cowork and can even be scaled across your team. You can see I have hundreds of files here in what I call our Ben AI OS that is shared across all my team members too. So everyone's AI agents on Cowork have access to all relevant context documents around our business. But for now, don't worry about that yet. Experimenting with this is already a big step. I'll explain exactly how to set up an AI operating system at the end. So now that we've covered the setup and file access and projects, the next thing that makes Claude Cowork powerful is being able to connect it to the internet and any software we use. Now, connectors might sound simple, but it's actually important to understand when to use each one of these in order to make Claude efficiently use the internet and your tools. Now, first we have the built-in connectors from Claude Cowork, which we can find here in Customize and in Connectors here. You can see I already have it connected to my Google inbox, Fireflies for my meeting transcriptions, my CRM, Slack, etc. And this allows Claude now to take actions and get data directly from these softwares. For example, I can now go into that YouTube video ideation chat and say something like, add idea 4 and 5 into my Notion YouTube tutorial pipeline. And now directly updated my Notion pipeline with the 2 ideas and a description. Now this becomes especially powerful with skills and automations, which I'll show you later. But first, how do you install them? Now, if Claude has a native or built-in integration, it's really easy. We can just go here to browse connectors, and for example, Notion, we can just see if it appears. And then usually it's just all you need to do is log in and it's connected. Now, Claude is expanding these built-in integrations quickly, but the reality is that many softwares are not in this connector list yet. but this doesn't mean we cannot access them. So the second best option you have is to use an MCP server. Now, all of the connectors that you're seeing in here are also MCP servers under the hood. And all an MCP is basically a bundled set of all the API calls or actions for a tool into one package that we can easily give to this AI agent in CoWork without installing all of these actions or API calls separately. For example, you can see that the Airtable MCP has many of these different API calls all installed through the MCP server directly. Now, what I see most people do when their connector is not listed in the connectors in Claude is they start using the Claude browser to access the software. Now, I highly recommend exploring two other options before doing that. Now, why is that? Because browser use is actually an extremely inefficient way to access softwares or tools. It's token heavy, error prone, and pretty expensive. So the second best thing you want to explore is to explore if they have an MCP server. So the best thing you can do is just go to Google. You just type in your tool together with MCP server, for example, Webflow MCP server. And if your tool has an MCP server, usually the documentation page will pop up, for example, here. And in these documentation pages, almost always you have the instructions on how to set it up inside of Claude Desktop. For the Webflow one here, for example, you have installed the MCP server. Now, there's generally two ways you might have to set up this external MCP server and connect it to Claude CoWork. Sometimes you'll get a remote server URL. In this case, no, but if it does, you can copy that URL. Then you can just go here to connectors and then click the plus icon and add custom connector. And there you can add the remote MCP server URL with some advanced settings, which will usually be listed in the documentation. Now, you might not always be able to install it like that. So the second way is by opening up the configuration file. We do that by going to the settings. Then we click here below on developer. We click on edit config. And there we'll get a JSON file, which you can open in any text editor. In my case, it will open in an IDE. You can just then take that config file or that JSON, throw it into any AI chat and go, can you please update this JSON with the new Webflow MCP server? You then add in the instructions from Webflow in this case. Claude then gives you the updated JSON, which you can paste back in to the config file. You save that, and when you reinstall Claude, you will have the Webflow MCP installed. Now, but what if your software doesn't actually have an MCP server? The next best thing to do is to actually build your own MCP server. Claude has a built-in feature or skill that helps you build an MCP server for a software or a tool that doesn't have it natively yet. Again, you can use a browser, but it's going to be more efficient. So if it's a software you want to access a lot through CoWork, highly recommend exploring this option first. For example, my community is run in Circle, and Circle doesn't have an MCP. So what I did is I just asked Claude, use the MCP builder skill. And then I asked, can you build me an MCP server for Circle.so? And it then built me an entire MCP server from scratch for Circle and gave me a step-by-step breakdown on how to install it, which will be very similar to what I showed you before. Now, let's say your software doesn't even have APIs, let alone an MCP, or it's just a tool that you want to access maybe once or twice. Then you don't want to actually go through setting up this MCP, of course, and that's where you can use the Claude browser. Now, generally, you can just tell Claude to use the browser, or generally, when you tell it to access a software it doesn't have a connector or an MCP connection with yet, it will use the browser automatically. Then lastly, we also now have Claude Computer Control. This is where we can actually let Claude not only access our browser, but our entire computer. Now, this is the most inefficient and token-heavy way to access external softwares. And because we can now already give Claude access to files on our computer, and we have all these ways to connect it more efficiently to tools in the internet, there are not a lot of use cases you want to actually use this for, in my opinion. Maybe if you have some local software with specific workflows, this is something you might want to explore. But again, it's going to be very inefficient, slow, probably pretty expensive and token heavy. Now, if you want to use it, you have to go to the settings first and turn it on. And then here under the settings, the general settings in the desktop app, you have to turn on computer use here. And the way I use it is by just telling Claude that it has to use it. For example, update this in my anti-gravity IDE using Claude Computer Control with this new JSON. You can see it's now taking control of my computer. Now it's doing this based on vision. That's why it's so token heavy and sort of inefficient, and it will also be slow, as you can see. So you see it says, I can see the Claude desktop config files already open and has the updated JSON. So nice feature. There might be some use cases, but in practice, you want to go with the other options first. Now, one more thing I would recommend for any connectors, always put in the settings on always allow, as long as that's safe, of course, but it will prevent you from giving permission all the time. Now, one more thing I want to add is internet use, let's say for research tasks, etc. Claude can now read most links you give it, right? Any website link you give it, it can read it, but some websites will have restrictions. So sometimes Claude can't access all websites. Now, the most common ones where you'll see these restrictions are social media sites like LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, etc. They can't directly be accessed by Claude by just giving Claude a link. Now, here again, we have two options. Use the browser to access these social media pages or pages that Claude can't access. But the second option, again, is the preferred option, which is a far more efficient option, is to use a tool called Apify. And Apify is basically a scraping connector that can access all of these social media and any website that can't be scraped directly by Claude. So here you can see we have Apify with lots of different scrapers to get data from hard to scrape websites. So if you're planning to get data from these types of websites often, I highly recommend installing Apify. Later in this video, at the marketing use cases part of this video, I'll show you step by step how to set up this Apify connector. Now, lastly, we have another feature here that wasn't available in Claude Chat, of course, which is called Dispatch. Now, Dispatch basically means we can now use Claude CoWork directly from our phone. All we have to do is install the Claude app on our phone. We then connect it to the same account. We allow for Dispatch, and then we can trigger Claude CoWork and our computer from our phone. And this is, of course, really powerful because this allows these AI agents to start working and doing tasks on our computer and in our softwares, even when we're not in front of our computer. For example, here through my phone, I said, check my emails of today. Do I have anything important? And then it went through my email inbox to give me a summary on my phone. Now, this becomes especially powerful when you're a bit more advanced and have automations and skills set up in Claude CoWork, but it's good to know that this feature exists. So now that you understand the fundamentals of Claude CoWork with file access, projects, and connectors, let me cover the most important thing to get good at in Claude CoWork: skills. Now, this guide should help you whether you work with Claude Code, CoWork, OpenAI, Google, as they all have integrated skills by now. Now, before we dive into what skills are and how to build them effectively, let me quickly explain why learning skills is a big deal. Now, we're all seeing that these AI agents are getting really powerful, but no matter how good they get, they still need those specific guardrails, context, and SOPs around all the unique ways you and a business do things and use software. Now, we've tried to solve this before. Of course, we have projects and custom GPTs where you set a system prompt and add context files. But generally, the problem with these is they're isolated. You're hopping between different windows. They don't really self-improve and can't handle a lot of context. On the other side, of course, we have N8N and automation platforms that hard code the guardrails and make a system deterministic. And for fully deterministic, non-human in the loop workflows, these are still great. But most day-to-day work isn't actually deterministic. The processes aren't always clear-cut. It's context dependent. It requires judgment. And that's why human in the loop is often really important to get good outputs from AI. And skills sit in the middle. They're essentially instructions for an AI agent on how to do a specific process. They can self-improve. They have human in the loop. But unlike a project or a custom GPT, thousands of skills can be accessed by the same agent. And the game changer is that they can be created and updated by simply prompting. And that means anyone can start automating their tasks and workflows through a single interface on Claude Code, CoWork, or Codex. They're also shareable across your business. So one person's process and domain expertise can instantly be used by the entire team, which of course has huge implications for onboarding, consistency, and how a company operates. And if thousands of these specific capabilities can be given to one very capable general agent, it seems likely that AI agents will slowly become the single interface for doing work. Now, of course, we are very early with this, but I predict that building the skill infrastructure for these agents to do specific tasks well will not only allow you and your company to become far more productive, it will also become monetizable, sort of like a new software layer. But just like with software engineering, prompt engineering, and AI automation engineering, you need to actually get good at it. Even though anyone can create skills through prompts, the same skill can produce completely different outputs depending on how you build them. For example, this is an infographic that I got out of an infographic skill that I quickly created. And this is the output of the same input of an infographic skill I put a lot more effort in. As you can see, it's a lot clearer and a lot more aligned to my brand. I'll show you a full demo of the infographic scale later in this video. Also, if you want access to that infographic scale and all of the other skills me and my team are building out, you can also check out my AI Accelerator, where we list them all for you to download or customize. Now, before showing you how to build these types of skills, it's good to understand what skills actually are. And simply put, agent skills are folders of instructions, scripts, and resources that agents can use to do things more accurately and efficiently. And at the core, we have the skill.md file. And you can basically see this as an instruction on how to do a process. Think of it like a system prompt, a Claude project, or a custom GPT. But besides that process instruction, we can have additional instructions on how and when to use knowledge files, how and when to use tools, how and when when to spin up sub-agents, and how and when to use code executions. So the skill MD, you can basically see as the SOP. Now that skill MD is just the core. What makes skills more powerful are those additional reference files or the context we add. Now, what kind of reference files can we have? Now, firstly, we can build really simple skills with no reference files at all. It's just a skill MD or a process instruction. For example, we have a sales account research skill here from Anthropic, which has no additional reference files, just the skill MD here. And the skill MD, as you can see, includes an execution flow, right? Step 1, parse request. Step 2, web search, right? Step 3, enrichment. And step 4, CRM check. But commonly, when we build our skills, we want to add some reference files to provide the skill with more information. Firstly, we can have text files. For example, common ones you might want to include are example outputs, style guides, context around your ICP, your background, etc. For example, in my newsletter writer skill, you can see I have multiple reference files here to give the skill more context on my background, what we do, my ICP, and voice personality. Another common one to use is an MCP instructions file, which basically lays out to the agent how to use a specific tool efficiently in this specific skill process. For example, the way you navigate or use your CRM for this specific task. Now, don't worry, your agent can build these MCP documents. Now, a second type of reference file we can have in there are assets or non-text files like images, presentations, videos, or even binary. For example, to give it good output examples of a presentation layout that you want. And then lastly, reference files can even include code scripts, Python or JS functions. It can take actions like doing API calls in a software or executing functions. For example, in my infographic skill, we have a script to do an API call to the Nano Banana Google API call. So you can see that these skills can be very simple or can become quite complex and can look a lot more like a software, except skills, of course, are software for AI agents. But how are we able to give one AI agent access to thousands of these skills, feed it all of these documents without overloading it with context? Now, this is done through a process called progressive disclosure. Now, it sounds complicated, but it's not. Basically, when we create or upload a new skill and give it to our AI agent in Claude Cowork or Code, only the metadata, which is the description and the name, are stored in the agent memory. In my infographic skill, this is the name and this is the description. And this is how your agent knows when to trigger or use a specific skill. And then only when the skill is triggered, the skill MD or the process will be loaded into the context window of the agent to understand how to execute on this specific process. And only when the skill instructs to use a reference file, it loads the reference file into the context window. And because of this progressive disclosure of context, we can give one agent access to thousands of potential skills. Now, skills and plugins are relevant for any industry, business department, and any niche workflow. And we're seeing 3 layers of skills and plugins appear. We have the general plugins and skills, for example, the ones built by Anthropic or OpenAI, but we're already seeing marketplaces of skills like Skills MP, Smithery, where people are building and potentially selling them, and potentially SaaS businesses will start creating their own plugins. Now, as these will have to be general purpose skills in order to be relevant to multiple industries and businesses, companies will want to build their own ones based on their unique processes or customize some of these general skills. But even within a company, it makes sense for different employees and different people to customize skills to their specific way of working and their specific workflows. For example, an Anthropic or third-party, let's say sales outreach skill can be useful, but a company probably wants to customize and improve it by adding the company brand tone, the ICP, and the business context. And one sales rep's copywriting style will be different than another's, so they can even start customizing those skills for their specific copywriting style, for example. Of course, if you as an individual start to get good at it and you have specific domain expertise and build a skill out of it, you can potentially monetize it by providing it to the general public. So how do we actually build these skills ourselves? Now, we can first of all customize Anthropic's or the third-party provider skills. There are multiple of these marketplaces now, but the real unlock is really building them yourself, because every person and every company has their specific ways of working and their specific expertise. Now, there are 2 main ways to build your own. First way is you do a task once manually with an AI agent and then ask it to save it as a skill. And the second way is to instruct it on how to build the skill right away. For example, here I downloaded a third-party provider meta ad skill from one of the marketplaces, imported it and used it here in my own account. And then I asked it to use this skill combined with my specific knowledge sources to create a new skill that helps me create ads. And then it created a new skill, which I can add to my library. Customizing Anthropic's built-in plugins and skills is also very easy. You can just go to skills, click on edit and customize with Claude, or even the plugins by just clicking here on customize. And here I created my own skill by just prompting it and giving it some reference files. Now, whatever the method, applying some best practices is important. So let me start by saying that building good skills is kind of like an art. It's the art of putting your domain expertise of a process into something productizable and usable for an agent. And the more I do this, the more similarities I see between skill engineering and software engineering, but it's sort of like software engineering for an AI agent. But you have to think about UX, right? When to add in human in the loop. You have to think about context engineering, right? Which balance of context produces the best outcomes. You're adding features, removing things, handling edge cases, etc. But the beautiful thing with skills is you can easily update them with prompt. So skills are never finished. And what I've learned is the more you use them, the better they get. I've probably updated and iterated on my infographic skill around 5 times to get to the outcome that I get now. Now, the first step is the step that most people skip, but what makes the biggest impact. Before prompting to build or customize a skill, you really do want to take a step back and think about the ideal step-by-step process to get to a good outcome. You want to think about what knowledge sources or additional information you can give your AI agent in this skill to do a better job. Now, generally, some context or reference files that I recommend you have, especially if you're going to use these skills more for marketing or sales related skills, is what we do, basically a description of your business, a description of your ICP, of your voice personality if you're using this for LinkedIn, etc. Newsletter strategy, in this case, I have this also for my YouTube, for my LinkedIn, etc. And also a writing framework. These are some of the documents that I reuse across different skills too. So I highly recommend this. Now, if you don't have these reference files yet, you can do it together with Claude. For example, here I asked it, I want to create a YouTube strategy document that I can later give when I'm building skills for research, ideation, scripting, etc. And then I basically ask it to ask me some questions about my YouTube strategy. And through the planning mode, as you can see here, ask questions, etc., you'll get more and more context. And at the end here, you can see Claude generated a YouTube strategy document for me, which I can then reuse in multiple YouTube skills that I create. And once you have a few of these, building skills will get a lot more efficient. Now, once you have that, of course, you want to think about which tools or software the agent needs in order to do this task. And then if possible, you always want to prepare good output examples. And this is generally the thing that impacts performance the most. Now, once you have that sort of clear, we move to the building, which of course in this case is prompting. Now, I just go through a framework that I like to use, which is not hard science, but I think can help you to think about what to include to get to a good first outcome of your skill. Now, first, you want to define the name of the skill and how the skill should be triggered. So in this case, the name of the skill should be infographic generator and should be triggered anytime a user mentions he wants to generate or create an infographic. And this is what the agent uses to write the meta description. Then just like with prompting, you want to define the goal or the objective for this skill. It can be quite short because we dive a lot deeper into the process later. Now, in this case, an infographic skill that creates quality infographics according to my brand style for LinkedIn and newsletters. Then we want to give Claude context on connectors, APIs, or MCPs that it needs to use in this skill. Now, if there's a specific table, maybe a page or a process it should take in that software for this skill, you can also describe that here. And then you want to lay out the process step by step. This is one of the most important things, and it's good to actually spend some time on it. Now, a good way to think about what to include in each step is what does it need to do? First of all, when do you want a human in the loop? What kind of human in the loop do you want? With the dynamic QA boxes of Claude, we can now choose between check boxes, open fields, single select, etc., which kind of becomes like UX design. And for what additional context should be used to do this task better. If it's very short, you can add it in the prompt, but if you have a specific file it needs to read, you want to specify that for each of the steps. Even if you don't have the reference file yet, you can just paste the context here in the prompt and ask it to create a reference file for that skill with that context. Generally, we want to try to keep the skill MD very clean and focused on the process. Any additional information should be in the reference files. That's how your skill is going to perform a lot better. And lastly, you want to think about what you expect as an output for each of the steps. Something that I like to do and has made a big impact on my productivity is when you have human in the loop steps, ask Claude to always give you multiple variations or options which you can choose from instead of just one-off outputs. So I usually say something like this. It should give me 5 different ways an infographic could visualize this idea or concept. And then lastly, you want to think about rules for this skill. Here you can basically predict what could possibly go wrong when executing this skill and write it down as a rule. Now, this is also the section that you will continuously update when improving the skill. And 2 tips here in the rules section is, first of all, to double down on instructing it to use the knowledge files as obligatory steps in the process when needed. Otherwise, I notice it tends to skip over some. And second, I usually double down on the multiple variations with human in the loop. And lastly, a really good thing to include is progressive updates. Basically, instruct the skill to be automatically updated and improved when using the skill so it becomes self-learning. For example, every time I define a clear thing not to do anymore in this skill, update the rules section. And what can be very powerful too is instruct in the process that if a user approves the final outcome, to save that as a good example so it learns and builds more data around what good looks like automatically. Now, let me show you a quick demo of how my infographic works so you get a better idea of what you can get out of this. So in this case, I'm using the code tab here because with API calls, it can be a little bit easier. So I can just trigger it with the / command. And this is already an updated version from this initial prompt that I gave it. First, it asked me what content should I turn into an infographic. So I'll just paste in a part of my video where I talk about what skills are. A later update I made from this first prompt is to ask it first for which platform it is to understand which format it has to generate it in. So in this case, LinkedIn. And as you can see, it uses these QA boxes because I instructed it to do that. And then what type of visual should it be? Infographic. Then I later adjusted it and iterated on it to get a checkbox out so I can actually start generating multiple variations. But here it suggests me what we should visualize. In this case, I'll go with anatomy of a skill. And then it suggests me ways to visualize that concept. I can choose what makes most sense and generate those. I'll just do all of them. Now, again, the first time I launched this prompt, it wasn't this good yet. I had to iterate 3 or 4 times, add in extra rules, etc. So it became an iterative process. And it's really about that. The more you use it, the better it becomes. But these are quite powerful and really follow my brands down and guidelines. And you can see I added this box at the end. If I click keep all finalize, it will save it as the good output examples. So it gets trained on what good looks like. Now, building your skills through this framework will allow you to get to good skills a lot faster. But to get to really optimized, high-performing skills, we need to efficiently test and improve them. That's why in the next section, I'll teach you how to use Claude Skills 2.0, which is Claude's built-in evaluation and testing feature that can help you optimize your skills really fast. So what are these skills 2.0? Basically, Anthropic just updated their skill creator skill. You can see that it now has folders with Eval viewer, agents that can analyze, compare, and grade, and scripts for benchmarking and reports. Now, you don't have to understand what's actually in there, but this basically allows us to run automatic tests on our skills in order to improve them faster. For example, here I ran a test on my YouTube to newsletter repurposing skill. It ran 5 test variations and automatically scored performance based on my criteria, like word count, M dashes, and if it included personal stories, and then automatically scored the performance of each of the tests. I can also check the outputs from the test or the eval here in this report. And based on the performance result and my feedback, which I can give here for all the different variations, it can optimize a skill far faster and drastically improve the way we build good skills. Now, although this is a great feature, it is actually really important to understand how to use this efficiently. Now, before showing you a full demo of how to use them and all the use cases for them, it's important to understand how they actually work. And now, as I showed, they've basically just updated the existing skill creator skill to now include these evals, which basically just means testing. So if you've already created a skill, you can just build a skill by prompting it. And this will still work the same way with these new skills. But now, after you've created a skill, Claude will automatically ask you to test your skill. But instead of just running one test and you evaluating the output, it can run multiple tests at the same time and focus on testing specific things and give benchmarks or scores for them. For example, you can test on speed, token usage, output quality, tool call use, let's say copywriting style, but really anything you want to test it on. It will then give you that data in a nice structured document that I showed you for you to analyze. And based on the results, both good and bad, and your feedback, it can easily update and optimize the skill very fast. And if you do a few of these iteration loops, you can get to really good skills really fast. Now, besides this, there's another new thing we can do that can help you optimize the skills you build even more, which is through A/B tests. And in A/B tests, you're basically testing different versions of skills to see which one works best. You could also test your current skill against non-skills to see if it actually performs better than if you wouldn't have a skill at all. But Anthropic mostly recommends to do this when a new model is released, like let's say, for example, Opus 4.7 or 8, because your skill might become irrelevant when models become more powerful. So let me show you some examples of how to create these skills, test them efficiently with both evals and A/B tests to get to good skills fast. Now, just show you a full process of building and testing a skill to get to good skills fast. Now, here you can see that I built my YouTube to newsletter repurposing skill from scratch. I did this using a prompt format that I covered in my last video on skill building to get to a good first version of the skill. Now, this is not hard science, but it's a good framework to go through to make sure you include all best practices when creating a new skill. Now, if you want a breakdown of the entire framework, you can also check out my last video, but I'll go through it very quickly here too. Now, even though we can prompt it really quick to create a skill, actually thinking about it and putting some effort in is really important, because the more accurate and precise you are, both when creating the skill and testing the skill, the more efficient this process and the better your skill is going to be. So in this case, I'd said create a skill according to the following guidelines. Then I gave it a description of what the name of the skill should be and how the skill should be triggered. So in this case, the name of the skill should be YouTube to newsletter. It should be triggered anytime a user mentions that he wants to repurpose a YouTube video into a newsletter. Then I gave it the main goal for the skill. In this case, a skill that repurposes a YouTube video into a full, ready to publish newsletter issue written in my voice and style. Then I covered the connectors that it has to use in this skill. In this skill, you need to use the YouTube transcript MCP from Apify to extract the video transcript. Also, I specified the reference files it has to include in the skill. In this case, these are the reference files that I find get my copywriting skills to way better outputs. Like, for example, the what we do, which is basically a description of my business, my ICP, my voice personality, a newsletter strategy doc, a writing framework, and newsletter examples, which is one of the most important for copywriting skills. So these skills actually follow your tone of voice. And then I laid out the entire process it has to follow to get to that final outcome. So in this case, ask the user for the YouTube video they want to repurpose, extract the video transcript using Apify, then read the reference files, analyze the transcript, and suggest 5 newsletter angles. In this process, I also define where I want to have human in the loop. For example, here, present the suggestions using the QA box, and where I want the output to be. In this case, save the newsletter as a Word document. And lastly, one section I like to include in these skill prompts is the progressive updates. Whenever a user specifies specifically not to do something anymore, it should automatically update the rule section in the skill MD. And this is basically how your skill can become self-learning, because anytime you can give it quick feedback, it can automatically update the skill, so it won't do that next time. Now, with this prompt and these reference files, it started creating the skill, as you can see here. Now, of course, this was already possible before the update of the skills, but now you see Claude asked me, want me to run some test cases to make sure it performs well, or are you happy to try it out directly? So in this case, I said, yes, okay, please run some tests. And now it started doing an eval. So you can see it says, let me set up test use cases and run them. I'll create 3 realistic test prompts with different YouTube videos. It then basically spins up 3 different sub-agents to run these tests in parallel. And then it started evaluating the outputs based on the criteria, as you can see here. Now, this is the point why we need to actually understand how to use this efficiently, because in this case, I didn't specify what the testing criteria should be or what to optimize for. So Claude basically came up with the criteria itself, probably with some information from my reference file. So in this case, it defined these criteria, right? A PS section with a soft pitch to my AI community, a signature sign off with Ben, a word count range, and if it actually produced a docs file. Now, and of course, this can be useful to sort of test if your skill actually is functioning or working. But if you actually want to optimize it, we want to be much more precise on what to optimize for and the criteria to test on. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. But as a result here, we get, of course, that report where we can basically see the full execution of each of the tests. So we can see the prompt here that was used in this specific test, the steps that were completed. So in this case, video collection, transcript extraction, reference file analysis. So basically checked if it actually followed the step-by-step process instructed in the skill. Now in this case, it did it well. And then it also gives us the full output of the newsletter. We can also see the formal grades of the criteria it tests for here. In this case, 0 failed. And we can give feedback on each of the specific test results here. And if we click on next here, we can go through all the different variations of tests and give feedback. And if we want to optimize the skill, we can basically just tell Claude to either do it based on the results of the test he run or combine it together with our feedback. So if you add feedback to each of the tests, you can just click copy here and add that then to the chat, and it will have more context on how to optimize this. Now, again, giving a basic prompt like I did, like saying run some tests. May be useful, again, to check if it's actually functional. But if you actually want to optimize it for specific criteria, we have to be much more specific. So what I recommend you at least include when you prompt Claude to run an eval or a test is to define what you're going to optimize this test for. And it's really important to choose one here. Don't try to optimize 5 or 6 different things at the same time, because there will be too many variables. So you want to test one thing at a time, optimize one thing at a time. And also you want to define the criteria for the evals. And optionally, you can define how the test should be done. So for example, in my case, I said, let's run a new test. And we're going to optimize the test for matching Ben's copywriting style and voice as closely as possible. Don't use the current test. It should be a new test. Now, the criteria for the evals are how closely does it follow Ben's example references? Second, does it have M dashes? Third, the length of the newsletter. And fourth, does it include personal stories or references from Ben's personal background reference file? And then I defined how the test should be done, because of course I don't want this to run on 5 different YouTube videos. I want to see different outputs based on the same YouTube video. So we're going to use only one YouTube video to test 5 different variations. And you can also define how many test variations you want the eval or the test to run. So in this case, I specified 5. Then it ran the test again, and in this case, it ran the test based on my criteria. So it ran it on a style match, and you can see 2 out of 5 failed, word count, and personal stories. And you can see 1 out of 5 failed. And you can see this is already a much more useful test result. And based on these test results and evals, I can tell Claude to optimize for not failing on the personal stories and the style match. And it will already do a pretty good job in optimizing my skill. But of course, again, I can go into the review and give it extra feedback. Just copy it, add it here, and it can update the skill to make a better version. Now, lastly, let me show you a quick example of how and when to use A/B tests, where we actually test different versions of skills against each other. Now, this is generally what you want to do only when you already have a functioning and sort of good performing skill. And these A/B tests basically allow you to optimize functions of skills even more. Now, the way we do it is by just telling Claude to run an A/B test on the skill. For example, here I said, use the creator skill to run an A/B test on the YouTube to newsletter skill so that we optimize the skill for speed. It can't affect the step-by-step process. The process still has to be there, and the reference file still has to be read. It has to use this YouTube link for the test. Now, of course, you can use these A/B tests to optimize for speed, token usage, output quality, again, really anything you can imagine. But in my opinion, it's much more focused on really trying to get from an already good skill to a great skill or a more efficient skill. What it does in this case is it basically spins up a second skill, a version B, that in this case is a leaner skill. It cuts away some of the context that it thinks is unnecessary to make it run faster. But it basically comes up with this idea of this separate version or this type B version of a skill itself. Also, it doesn't have to be just one. You can also tell it to spin up 6 different versions of skills. Then it ran the tests, and the results are actually that my original skill used 93,000 tokens and took 204 seconds. And the optimized new version only took 77,000 tokens and was a lot faster with 160 seconds. But what you can see is that it failed at transcription extraction and the word count was too short. And then at these A/B tests, we also have in the report a benchmark tab here where we can compare the outputs and see how the two skills performed against each other. I can say in this case, it calls it without skill, but this basically means the original skill. And of course, it was a lot faster, but it failed in the transcription and the word count. Claude then also gives you a recommendation on what to do based on the results. So in this case, the speed optimization are solid and worth keeping. The 2 failures are likely due to the transcript tool behaving differently for each agent, which ran the different tests, right? Not the skill changes themselves. A rerun would confirm this. I actually later reran it and it actually worked. I didn't see a significant difference in the outputs. So I updated the skill and now it's a far faster skill at a lower token usage. Now again, you can of course use these A/B tests for many more things. For example, I also did an A/B test for context engineering, because I know that for these copywriting skills and automations, one of the most important impacts on the output quality is which balance of reference files or context files that you give it. So for example, you can also run an A/B test to define if a skill with or without a specific reference file is more efficient or not. So in this case, for example, I said use the skill creator skill which is important to mention. To do an A/B test on the YouTube newsletter skill, I want to run one skill that uses all the 8 reference files and one skill that uses all of them, but not the voice personality reference files. I want to assess if the voice personality file actually improves the copy or harms it. Use this YouTube link for all the tests. And then again, in this case, it created one new skill without the voice personality reference file, ran the test on the same YouTube link, and give me an output. And in this case, of course, it's a very subjective output. So I'd really need to read both of these newsletters to make sure that one is better than the other, or if there's really a difference, and then maybe optimize the skill accordingly. Now, these reference files that I use for copywriting styles actually come out of a lot of experimentation and testing that I've done before last year through Prometheus, which is basically a context engineering or prompt engineering IDE. So if you're building any copywriting skills, I highly recommend implementing those context files that I mentioned to get a good match of your tone of voice and style. Again, you can find all of these reference files and adapt them easily by just going to my AI community or AI Accelerator. I have all these reference files, all the skills we're building out, including the one I showed you. We have one-on-one unlimited live tech help and multiple weekly Q&As and workshops where we dive a lot deeper into these tools. So if that's interesting to you, definitely check it out. We also have blueprints on how to get your first customers in AI if you're interested in building your own business. So now that you understand everything you need to know about skills, let me move to the next topic, which is the obvious next step, understanding plugins. Plugins are basically a bundled set of skills, connectors, and agents to essentially add another layer of complexity on top of skills. They also allow you to easily share them across teams and externally, and you can import external plugins into your Claude Cowork. As you can see, Anthropic has already built some of these plugins for us across all business departments. So we have sales, productivity, product management, legal, finance, customer support, etc. Now, the idea from Anthropic is to basically create these plugins packaged into job departments. So each plugin basically becomes a specialist in that job function. For example, we have the customer support plugin here with specific connectors to customer service platforms and skills on how to do specific tasks relevant to customer support, like customer research, response drafting, and escalation. I can use these plugins and skills by just adding a slash, go to plugins, and then, for example, go to sales and go to the call prep skill. But I can also just tell Claude, I want to prepare for a sales call, and it would automatically assume I want to use that skill. Now, these Anthropic plugins are great, but as every company or person is unique, I think the real unlock is by creating or customizing them for yourself. Now, before showing you some examples and how to set them up, let me quickly explain what exactly these plugins are, why they can be more powerful than just skills, and how these might fundamentally change the SaaS landscape and the way we work. Plugins are essentially packaged or bundled sets of skills, commands, agents, and connectors. And this basically means and does 3 things. First, it adds a layer of complexity on top of skills, because plugins can include multiple skills. It can include commands, which serve as workflow triggers. They can trigger multiple skills in sequence to automate more complex tasks. It can have specialized agent teams and a preset set of connectors. So we can add a lot more functionality to these plugins. Second, through plugins, these bundled packages can easily be shared and divided between company departments. Sales teams can get a sales plugin, marketing teams can get a marketing plugin, each with the connectors and skills that each department needs. And thirdly, these plugins are also becoming versionable, skills too, by the way, which means they can be updated at any time across any account that uses them. And because of these characteristics, plugins start to look a lot more like software, of course, or SaaS. And I predict that SaaS will start to launch their own plugins with their specific functionalities. Through Claude Cowork, anyone now, without any technical understanding in a business, can start automating their day-to-day tasks and workflows across softwares, through skills and agentic workflows. And they can be easily made and improved without any technical understanding by just prompting it. They also become very easily shareable and usable by anyone in the business. For example, my developer can now use my LinkedIn writer skill to write a LinkedIn post according to my specific workflow with my domain expertise and knowledge sources embedded. And any new employee like this will be able to do the job 10 times faster. And this setup could potentially, of course, be much bigger than just automating a few tasks. We are still early with this. We're definitely not there yet. But of course, the potential for Claude Cowork or an AI agent is to become the main interface for a person or a business to do work. Most of us jump between 15 different tools and softwares every day, each with their own interface, with their own learning curve. But with plugins, Claude can basically be in the middle of all of that, you talk to one interface only, and Claude can access all of these softwares through plugins and connections. I predict that Claude CoWork specifically will slowly, but more importantly, safely start to add the most popular features from Claude Code and Open Claude, like persistent memory, proactive messages, maybe multi-agent teams, to make it actually usable for an average business and a non-developer. And of course, SaaS companies can be threatened by this. When Anthropic launched plugins, companies like Salesforce, ServiceNow, and Adobe all saw their stock drop because, of course, if the main interface for work really is slowly becoming agentic through Claude, Google, or OpenAI, it probably becomes a superior interface instead of hopping between different tools all the time. Now, are all of these SaaS going to be wiped out? Nobody really knows. I think we're still very early, but one potential outcome could be that these SaaS businesses will build their own plugins. Some SaaS companies are already planning to do this, but maybe plugins can potentially become the way a SaaS survives. They can build plugins with their unique workflows, tools, and functions, and potentially plug them into an Anthropic or OpenAI plugin marketplace. And I potentially see three types of plugin appear. First, we'll have the Anthropic built plugins. Right now, Anthropic has released these open source plugins for the most common business departments, but they've already confirmed that organization-wide sharing and private plugin marketplaces are coming soon to make them more accessible to businesses. Then second, I think we'll see third-party provider plugins coming up. Maybe SaaS companies will start building their own plugins. We'll probably see other builders providing plugins that could potentially become monetizable. And then lastly, of course, we will have loads of custom built plugins because every business has unique workflows and ways of doing work. We've been doing this internally. We're building out our own BenAI marketplace with plugins across each of our company departments. And that's really what I think you should be exploring right now, building your own custom plugins. So how do you set them up and customize them for yourself? Now, there are two main paths. First, we can use the existing Anthropic and third-party provider skills and plugins and customize them for our unique workflows and ways of working. Anthropic made this really easy to do because in the skills, we can basically just use a skill and ask Claude to adapt the skill. For example, in the draft outreach message, we can tell Claude inside of the window, please adjust the draft outreach skill and add, let's say, some examples of your outreach templates. You can also easily customize an entire plugin here from Anthropic by just going here to the plugin and clicking customize. And you'll see that you can just talk to Claude and customize this specific sales plugin for your company. Now, using and customizing these pre-built ones is definitely useful, but I think the real unlock is by building your own. And the way I recommend doing it is by creating skills first. Once you have a set of skills, you can bundle them into a plugin. And then if you want to automate more complex workflows, you can chain multiple of these skills together into agentic commands. So how do you set up these skills? Again, really easy. You can either just tell Claude, can you help me create a skill that helps me with my YouTube packaging? I lay out the process of my YouTube packaging with some additional documents or references. And Claude then creates a skill that we can add to our library. And the second way is to use some of your old projects or custom GPTs and transform them into skills, which I've been doing a lot. Again, you can just throw in the system prompt and any specific documentation you had in your project, and Claude can build a skill out of it. Now, if you've already built some skills and you want to bundle it into a plugin and maybe add some agentic commands to it, again, you can do it really easily in Anthropic. You can literally just ask Claude, can you create a plugin for me? Then you can define which skills, connectors, etc. you want to include, and Claude can build the plugin for you. So you can see it built the entire plugin here, and then I can just click add to plugins. Now, an important note here is that all of these plugins or skills that you create on your own Claude Cowork account will only be locally saved. So if you want to use this across your business, other people will not have access to it yet. So the easiest way to do that is by just ask Claude to give you a zip file so I can share the plugin across my team, right? Claude will then give you a zip file, which you can open, share to other people, and other people can then go into their plugin section and upload that zip file here. Now, I think Claude Cowork is going to make this sharing internally of plugins and even externally a lot easier very soon. But for now, if you want to internally or even externally want to share these plugins or even marketplaces, which are groups of plugins, you'd either have to do it through zip files or through GitHub. You'd most likely have to set up a marketplace together with Claude Code. Now, Anthropic released a full guide on how to do this, which I'll make sure to link in the description below too, if you're interested in actually deploying it maybe on a marketplace or really company-wide through a GitHub link. But again, I think Claude Cowork will make this a lot easier very soon. So now that you understand plugins, let me cover another major feature in both these plugins and in Claude Cowork, which is using agents. Agents in Claude Cowork allow us to run bulk tasks in parallel and allow us to build more complex automations. So in this next section, I'll show you how they actually work and how to use them. Now, before explaining exactly how these agents work, let me show you a quick example of what they can be used for. For example, here I gave Claude a lead list of more than 150 marketing agencies, which we got from Apollo, a lead database. And then I let it qualify the list with sub-agents first according to our ICP criteria, which is a marketing agency providing SEO services and located in the US. And then you can see it launched 15 sub-agents to qualify all 150 leads in parallel. Each agent will use web search to verify the company actually offers SEO service and is US based. So here it launched 15 sub-agents in parallel and then identified that only 82 were qualified. And because these sub-agents work in parallel, this only took 2 minutes. After that, it went to the next step in this workflow, which is enriching the lead with more information. So it launched another 18 sub-agents, 17 lead researchers, and 1 LinkedIn scraper. It then added that qualification status and lead intelligence to the CSV sheet. And then it spun up another 17 agents to write personalized outreach messages based on the lead intelligence data. The personalized outreach messages are also added to the sheet. So as you can see here in the same chat in Claude, it qualified 82 out of 150 leads. It enriched 82 leads and then wrote 37 icebreaker messages. And this is really the power of agents because this was of course very difficult to do before we could use sub-agents. And now that we have plugins, each one of these bulk tasks can be saved as skills. Multiple of these skills can be strung together and combined into an agentic workflow through commands. And we can even save the specific agent instructions in the agent section. So you can see in our sales plugin here, we have specific skills for each of the tasks in the workflow for lead qualification, lead intelligence, and email personalization with specific instructions on how we exactly do these processes. For example, in the lead qualification skill, we have our ICP criteria, the qualification process it has to go through, and instructions on how and when to use a sub-agent here. The instructions for what these sub-agents have to do are saved here in another tab, which is called Agents. And here, for example, we have the lead qualifier sub-agent with a specific instruction on what these sub-agents need to do. We've combined these 3 skills into one command to trigger all of these skills in sequence together with all the agents with just one / command. So you can see the command we set up for outbound pipeline is just a sequence of steps to take and skills to use in order to execute a more complex workflow. And this allows us to run this multi-step workflow with sub-agents with just one command here, which is the command outbound pipeline, which I can trigger simply by going to plugins, sales, and outbound pipeline. Now, this might look a little bit complicated to you, but it's not, and I'm going to show you how to set this up yourself from scratch. Before agents were available in Claude, bulk processing was difficult for many tasks because we essentially only had one agent to process each task separately. This overloaded the context window, made it extremely slow, and often just not viable to do for these bulk processes. But Claude can now spin up these sub-agents, which can then process tasks in parallel, which just means at the same time. And each of these sub-agents can also use tools and skills. For example, our lead intelligence sub-agents uses a LinkedIn scraper to scrape LinkedIn data. So if we tell Claude Cowork to research 100 leads, for example, he could spin up 10 sub-agents, each researching 10 leads, through, let's say, the LinkedIn scraper and other tools, and then give a summary back of the lead research to the main agent. Now, why is this a big deal? Because the main agent will not be bloated with research context, just a summary. And context is one of the most precious resources for these agents, and therefore it will drastically improve the performance, first of all. And because sub-agents can run in parallel, a task like this one, in the example, can be performed theoretically 100 times faster. And because of this, we can actually start using Claude Cowork for these bulk task executions, for deep research tasks, but also we can start using it for these autonomous multi-step workflows. And these 3 things together make it a lot more powerful, and it becomes much more like an automation tool comparable to N8N or Make.com. Now, we're not completely there yet, which I'll get to later in this video, but because this is now possible, hundreds of new use cases pop up for automation right inside Claude Cowork. So you can think of, for example, creating bulk ad variations, writing bulk product or SEO descriptions, bulk email personalization. We can start doing data analysis on thousands of transcripts, for example, and pull all the research data back into a presentation. We can think of doing SEO audits. And of course, we can also combine these new use cases together to do autonomous multi-step automations in bulk, like I showed you in my example. Now, before showing you how to set it up and how to do this yourself, there's one more thing I want to clarify, because Claude Code now also came out with a new multi-agent feature, but this one is different from the one we have available in Claude Cowork. In Claude Code, we can now even run multi-agent teams that can communicate between each other, while in Cowork, they are all isolated sub-agents. Now, you can imagine that when they can communicate with each other, it really becomes an even more powerful setup, because they can work together towards a shared goal or a to-do list. Anthropic used this setup with this multi-agent team to build an entire C compiler in 2 weeks, which is something extremely hard to do in engineering and would normally take a large team of engineers to do for months. Now, this is really, really powerful, but I see it mostly as an engineering feature. Multi-agent teams are good for tasks where agents have to work together on one shared goal or work together on a to-do list, while sub-agents are preferred when each one can work in isolation. And for most day-to-day office-related work and tasks in marketing, sales, customer support, etc., the sub-agent setup is usually enough and can actually be preferred setup because it uses less tokens. And it's really all we need for most of these isolated tasks like lead research, analyzing data, etc. Now, even though sub-agents use less tokens than agent teams, they still use a lot of tokens. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind, and is still a limitation. It can use quite a lot of tokens when you spin up these sub-agents. Now, of course, this is going to get cheaper and cheaper, but if you want to start doing this, you probably want to be on the Claude Max plan to not be hitting your limits all the time. And second, what I've noticed is for really large bulk tasks, this is probably not a setup you can use yet. I've seen this work best for batches of 100 to 200. More than that, it's going to get complicated, take a long time, cost a lot of credits. That's why for large bulk workflows, especially ones that are non-human in the loop, an automation platform like N8N or Make.com is still a better option to automate those types of processes. So knowing that, let me show you how to use these agents in Claude Cowork. So first, I'll show you how to make sure Claude uses these parallel sub-agents, because there is a specific way you need to prompt it. Then I'll show you how to save these tasks as skills and agent files. And then I'll show you how you can build these commands and add them all into a plugin that you can easily share with your team or with other people. So let's say we're going to replicate that same use case as before, but in this case, I don't have the skills yet. Then give it the CSV sheet of the leads. And then I would prompt it with something like this. I want to qualify these leads against my ICP criteria. My ICP criteria are that we only work with marketing agencies who provide SEO services and are based in the US. Please spin up 15 parallel sub-agents that each research 10 leads in this list and make sure they're qualified leads. Based on the summaries you get back, you deliver an updated CSV sheet and add a column with the qualification status. Now, specifically mentioning that it has to spin up these parallel sub-agents is important, because sometimes if you don't say it, it will actually run sequential sub-agents, meaning that they'll be running one after the other, which means it's going to take a long time. And sometimes it won't even run sub-agents if you don't specifically tell it to. So you can see it already made a plan here, right? Launching 15 parallel sub-agents, collect results, and generate updated CSV. So you can see it's now spinning up these batches of sub-agents to process and qualify all of the leads. And you can see each of these sub-agents does multiple queries on the internet on each of the leads to find more information about them. So it's now done the qualification on the 150 leads, gave me a CSV sheet, which I can throw in to Sheets. And now we have a new column with qualification status and a qualification reason column. Now, if this is a repeated workflow that I would do, I could already save this as a skill by just telling Claude, please save this as a skill. So next time I don't have to give all of these instructions. It will already know exactly what to do with a lead list it will get. But I'll show you one more example, and then we're going to build the entire plugin right away. So we're going to build multiple skills, commands, and agents into a plugin right away. So let's say now we want to enrich the leads a bit so we can use that enriched data later for personalized outreach. Now, for this task specifically, and generally, if you're going to enrich leads, I'd highly recommend installing the Appify MCP. Now, if you don't know Appify yet, Appify basically has thousands of scrapers, including scrapers for hard to scrape websites like LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. And through the Apify MCP, we basically get instant access to all of these social media and websites that Claude cannot access. Now, you can just make an account for free here on Apify. You get some credits, but if you're going to use it a lot, I recommend upgrading, and it will cost you $29 a month. Now, once you're in your account, you need to get your API key, which you can get here by going to Settings and API and Integrations. And here you can copy your API key. Then in Claude, you can go to the connectors in the Settings and click Connectors. And you go to Browse Connectors and you look for Apify. You'll see that appear. Now, mine is already connected. But if it's not connected yet, it will ask you for the API key and enable tools, which basically specify which scrapers from Apify we're going to use. Now, the easiest way to do this is by going to mcp.apify.com. And here you can basically specify all the scrapers you want to give access to Claude. So first, I'd recommend selecting all here. Then you can click here on add or remove actors. And here you can specify all the ones you want. Let's say, for example, LinkedIn, mass LinkedIn profile scraper. And let's say a LinkedIn post scraper. This one, for example. So we actually know the last posts that our leads have posted, so we can use that as a personalization. So once I've selected, you can select way more. You click on Save Changes. Then you go here below. And then you take this part after the equal sign. You copy that. You go back to Claude, and that's what you add here in the Enable Tools, and you click on Save. Sometimes you have to restart your Claude Cowork for Apify to actually be accessible, but then you should have Apify installed. And now I can say something like, please spin up 10 parallel sub-agents that enrich 7 qualified leads each. They should find the lead's last LinkedIn post, the company size, and the company description using the Apify scraper, specifically the LinkedIn scrapers to get these details. And then you should add these data points to the CSV sheet so we can later use that data for personalized outreach. Again, I specified the use of parallel sub-agents and also how many leads each sub-agent should process. In general, what I've seen is the best is to have between 5 and 15 leads or tasks per sub-agent. Otherwise, it could take a lot longer if you do more. And if you spin up too many sub-agents, it also runs into complications sometimes in my experience. So you can see it spin up, again, 10 sub-agents. So you can see each of the sub-agents is using a LinkedIn profile scraper. So it's now enriched the CSV with the last LinkedIn post if they had one, company description and company size. So you can see we get the last LinkedIn post here, the enriched company size and the company overview. Now, of course, now we can do another skill to write personalized outreach messages based on this enriched data, but I think you get the point. So let me show you how you can now convert this into skills. Agent docs, so you don't have to repeat what these agents have to do, and commands to string multiple of these tasks together into one workflow. Now, the amazing thing in Claude is that we can build these skills right from prompt. Now, because we're going to create multiple skills, we're going to create commands and agents, I would advise you to add them all into one plugin. So it's all stored inside of the same plugin, which then can also easily be shared. So I could say something like, for example, please create a new plugin that's called Ben's outbound sales process. Inside of that plugin, I want to create one skill for the exact way we did the lead qualification and call it Ben's lead qualification skill. Make sure to also create an agent.md, and the skill should refer to the agent.md instructions on what the agents need to do. Also create a skill for the exact way we did the enrichment process and call it Ben's enrichment skill. In that one, also make sure to create a separate agent.md for the enrichment process. In both of these skills, it should clearly be instructed to spin up parallel batches of sub-agents, just like we did in the task here above. Again, this is important to specify also when you're creating the skills or the plugin, because then it's clearly stated in the skill to use those parallel sub-agents. Of course, we can also combine this into a command to trigger both of these skills or tasks at once with one specific command. So, for example, I could say something like, also, please create a command.md where I can trigger both of these skills in sequence when I trigger a slash command called outbound enrichment. This command should ask the user for a CSV sheet with leads, and it should then automatically use the lead qualification skill and the lead enrichment skill in sequence to deliver a fully enriched CSV to the user at the end. All of these new documents and files should be stored in the same plugin. So you can see it now starts building the plugin. It makes to-do list, create plugin directory, create lead qualification skill, create lead enrichment skill, create outbound enrichment command. So now I've created the entire plugin with 2 skills, lead enrichment and lead qualification, 1 command, outbound enrichment. As you'll see, it already includes all the instructions on how to run this workflow, right? So first use the lead qualification, then the lead enrichment. We have the agents, the enrichment agent and the qualification agent. Now, sometimes it gives you a button which is called install, so you can install it as a plugin right away. Sometimes it doesn't work in my experience, so you can just ask it to give you the plugin as a zip file. This then you can use to share to other people or to import it yourself if you don't have the install button. And then you can just go to your plugin section, go to plus and click on upload plugin. And then you can drag that in and upload. And now you can see I have my new plugin with commands, skills, and agents. You can also upload these plugins onto a GitHub account so you can get a link, a versionable link that you can share with other people. And now that I have these commands and skills, I can of course trigger them anytime I want to do this task again right inside Claude. So I can just go and /command, go to plugins and trigger the outbound enrichment command. Now, the last major feature you really want to understand is scheduled tasks. Scheduled tasks allow you to schedule prompts and skills, and it's a game changer because, of course, it now allows Claude Cowork to actually automate some of these tasks and skills on autopilot without you being there. As you can see here on the left, we now have an option called scheduled, where I can add a new task, define the name of the scheduled task, the description, the prompt that I automatically want to send, the time interval or frequency when we want to send it, the model we want to use, and the folder we give Claude access to. And essentially, when we do this, all Claude does is it automatically sends a prompt to a new Claude session at the defined time interval. So this can be every month, every week, every day, every 10 minutes, whatever you define. Now, this is cool, but the real unlock is scheduling not just prompts, but scheduling skills. Because with skills, we can really start automating our repetitive and day-to-day tasks. For example, I already have scheduled skills set up for daily email categorization, daily task reviews, post-meeting to-do updates, automatic follow-ups on failed customer payments, and monthly accounting. And to schedule a skill, all you need to do is add in the prompt that it has to use a skill at a specific time. For example, on the daily email check, I've checked my unread emails for relevance. You're my personal assistant. Use the daily email skill. You see that this repeats every day at 5:46 p.m. And then here on the left in the scheduled section, we can see all the scheduled task runs for all of the different tasks. So if I go to the daily email check, you can see that it got triggered automatically at 5:46 p.m. It then read the skill to know what to do and then started going through my Gmail inbox and prioritizing action items. Now, one limitation that we still have is that this will only run if your Claude desktop is opened. If it's not, it will not run the scheduled tasks and it will run them immediately whenever you open the Claude desktop or Claude Cowork app. Because we can now save our processes as skills, give Cowork access to our tools, our browser, and folders on our computer, this really becomes like a powerful automation platform. Now, before showing you the other use cases that I've been using it for, I want to show you quickly, there are 2 other ways to schedule skills or tasks. You can just go into a chat and go /schedule. And here we can basically type in what kind of scheduled task we want to create. So just say every day at 6 a.m., schedule my email categorization skill. And then the third way is by just telling Claude whenever you're creating a new skill to schedule the skill at specific time interval. So for example, in my monthly accounting skill, I said, I need your help in creating a new skill. I laid out the process of doing my accounting. And then I said, you're going to run this on the first of each month at 9 a.m. And once you do this, it will automatically save it here to the scheduled section. Now, let me show you some examples of what I've been using it for. A really good one that's already making an impact on my revenue is an automatic failed payment follow-up. So this one basically runs every day. Then it checks first all the failed payments from yesterday, then reviews the previous email threads with these customers to make sure we didn't already send them a message. Then categorize the payment failure, and depending on that, it crafts an email according to the failure type, then saves that as a draft email in Gmail, so I can still actually check before sending it out, and then report the results. So you can see for this date, it found 2 failed payments, it crafted an email copy and added it as a draft in Gmail. Another one is to automatically analyze the transcripts from our team meetings on a daily basis, and then create the tasks for all our teams, give us an overview of the meeting, and prepare the next day's call and agenda automatically inside of Notion. So you can see this runs on a daily basis. It analyzes the transcript from Fireflies. It then creates tasks, updates our processes, and gives an overview of the meeting, and then adds that to Notion. As you can see here in my Notion, I got the meeting overview, key decisions made, and the action items. So this is a completely autonomous automation that runs in Claude Cowork. But even for non-autonomous automations like my accounting skill where I need human in the loop, this is still very useful because it basically also is a reminder for me to uh, to use this every first date of the month to go through this process. And it already can do a lot before I jump in to add some human in the loop. For example, it already goes through my Gmail, my Stripe, goes through my browser, can update the spreadsheet. And whenever it needs some more information, it can just ping me with this blue dot here. I can steer it or give it some extra information and it can finish the process. Now, the outcome I can't really show you because this is, of course, private information, but this skill uses, of course, Gmail, Stripe, web search, and even our Chrome browser to actually update the spreadsheet inside of Chrome. And the last one is very simple, which basically checks my tasks for the day and prioritizes according to importance, and also takes into account what I've done yesterday and the day before. But I think you get the idea, and I think this is a really powerful upgrade for Claude Cowork because this really starts looking like an automation platform. We can, of course, also start using this for notifications. For example, let's say in the email scale, I would add that if there's a high priority email, it should send me an urgent notification through Slack. You can also use this basically as a trigger for when something else happens in another software. Let's say, for example, you want to send a thank you email whenever a new customer has paid you. You can basically just run a scheduled task or skill that checks every hour if there were new payments, and if so, send an email or thank you email to that customer. What we don't have yet, of course, is instant triggers because we don't have webhooks yet, but we can basically get around that by just letting it do something on a very regular basis. And lastly, you can also schedule commands. If you don't know what commands are, commands you can basically combine multiple skills into a bigger workflow to automate even more complex tasks. For example, in this one, we have a command outbound pipeline, and this one includes 3 different skills: lead qualification, lead qualifier, and personalized outreach skill. We can also run a task to trigger a command, which will then trigger multiple skills in sequence. So we can really get to more and more complex automations. So now that you understand all the major features and the important concepts in Cowork, let me show you some actual real marketing use cases in Cowork, from copywriting to visuals to data analysis and research. I'll set up a skill entirely from scratch so you can see my thought process when I'm building these types of skills. And I'll show you plenty of examples that can hopefully give you some inspiration on building your own marketing skills. Let's start with copywriting. Now I'll show you an example of how I would use Cowork to automate the process of writing a newsletter in my tone of voice, but more importantly, how we would build a skill out of that. Now, there are really 3 main ways to build skills or automations around your specific workflows. The first one is by customizing Anthropic's built-in one. So we can go here to customize, browse plugins, and there we'll see Anthropic and partner plugins. So let's say, for example, we go to marketing, we can install it here, and now we have a new one here by Anthropic, and here we'll have all the skills of Anthropic. There are also marketplaces where people list their own skills for you to download, like Smithery or Skills MP. But because in general, these are more generic, they could be a good starting point, but I strongly believe that you should learn how to build your own. And to build your own, there are really 2 main ways. First, we can just lay out the entire process right away through Claude and tell it to build a skill or an automation around it. Now, this is mostly useful if you already have a very clear idea on a specific process and you have done it before with AI. For example, I built many skills like this by converting some of my old projects or custom GPTs, which were already proven processes with AI, and telling Claude to build a skill out of it by just giving it the system prompt. And then the second way, which I think for the majority of use cases and people is the way you should do it, is by doing the process once together with Claude manually here. Claude will then have all the context around how you do this process, and then you ask Claude to build a skill out of it. Now, one important thing to keep in mind before we start is that the key to working with Cowork is that you go into these chats with the intention of building a skill out of it. And this means it will likely take you a bit longer than if you would do this maybe even without AI, or even if you would just use AI to do this task once. And that's because we're essentially trying to build an automation around it. So go into this with the framework of I'm onboarding an intelligent intern once. That might take me a little bit more time, but once I've done it, this process is forever out of my hands. Because once you've put in the effort to actually do this a few days, you could have automated a large percentage of your day-to-day tasks and workflows. So let me walk you through an example of how I would do this. First, you want to get in the habit with Cowork to always select a folder to work in. Why is that? Because any assets you're going to generate, etc., you'll be able to access easily on your computer, and it can be saved in that specific folder. So let's say we're creating a new one. I open it. It can now access this folder and save things to this folder. So I can say, for example, I want you to help me write a newsletter based on my last YouTube video. I'll give it a link of my last YouTube video. Now, it doesn't have access to the transcript here. So in this case, I would say use the Apify MCP YouTube scraper to get the transcript and output it here. Now, if you don't know Apify, Apify is a really important connector you would need, especially for marketing use cases. Apify basically lists dozens of these scrapers, like YouTube transcription scrapers, Instagram scrapers, LinkedIn scrapers, etc., to get data from hard to scrape websites. So this is one of the most important connectors you want to set up in your Claude Cowork account for marketing use cases. How do you set this up? You can go back to Claude, you can go to settings, and there you'll find a tab called connectors. There you can go to browse connectors, and you can search for Apify. You can see that mine is already connected, but here you can install it. All you need is to set up an Apify account. You can start for free. Once you have created an account, all you need to do is go to settings and copy your API token. You go back, and in Apify, it will ask you to add your API token and to add your enabled tools, which basically means your scrapers. So how would you add those? Really easy. You go to MCP. Once you have an account, mcp.apify.com. Here you can select all the scrapers you want. For example, in my case, YouTube transcription scraper. You click that, you save changes. You click here on select all, select all, select all, and select all. And then here in the MCP server URL, you copy everything that's after the is symbol. You copy that, you put it in here, and that's how we let Claude know which scrapers we want to give it access to. You click save, and then you can go here on always allow. This is how Claude will not ask you permissions every time it uses a scraper. So if we go back to the chat, we can now see that we got the full transcript. Now, this is an example of what I was saying. This might take a little bit longer the first time. We have to set up Apify MCP, while I could just download the transcript myself and put it in here. But the point is, we're going into it with the intention of building an automation. So we want Claude to be able to do it himself through this Apify scraper instead of us copying and pasting all the time. So the next step in the process that I like to follow, especially for these copywriting tasks, is the following. This is a long transcript, so there's multiple ideas and angles in it. So I want first to define what angle we're going to take for my newsletter. So I would say something like, based on my ICP and newsletter strategy document, suggest me 5 potential angles for this newsletter based on this YouTube video. Now, if you don't know it yet, I'm using Whisperflow to talk to AI, which I highly recommend to install. Now, because we're going to define these angles, this is where I want to start giving Claude more context on my audience, my business, and my strategy. And that's why I'm saying here, based on my ICP and newsletter strategy document. For copywriting specifically, having these documents or context for AI is really the key to getting good output. Across all my copywriting skills, I have around 6 or 7 documents with extra context that I've seen produce the best outputs for copywriting tasks. So you can see I have a folder on my computer with all these context files, right? Ben AI profile background, what we do, my ICP, voice personality, newsletter strategy, pain points, my audience, writing framework, newsletter strategy, etc. Now, how do I build these? I basically build them together with AI. So I just told it, I want you to create a YouTube strategy document that I can later give to you when I'm building skills for research, ideation, scripting, etc. So can you help me go through some questions that you want to ask me in order to get that document straight? Now, I've pretty extensively tested also last year while building N8N automations, what balance of context and what types of files we need in order to get the best outputs for copywriting. So I'm going to make this a lot easier for you. All of the files that I use for copywriting and all of the others, which I'm going to show later in this video for visuals, etc., I'll put for free in the link in the description below. All you would have to do is download those, open a new chat session with Claude, give it a context file, and then say something like, this document is from someone else. I want to use this same format, but adapt it to me and my brand strategy. Please analyze the doc and ask me questions so you can build me a similar doc for me and my brand. Claude will then start asking you some questions, which you can just answer, and then you'll have these documents yourself. Now, again, this is going to take a little bit of effort. This is going to take you half an hour to an hour, but I can tell you these types of files I've used across many different skills, and I've used for over the last 6 months, not only in skills, but also in my automations. This is definitely worth putting the time in because the output quality of your skills is going to be 10 times better. So in this case, I would give it those 2 files, ICP and newsletter strategy. And by the way, for me personally, what I prefer to do with these types of skills where there is human in the loop is to always give multiple potential suggestions from AI instead of one-off outputs, because this allows me to choose from multiple options instead of iterating on one-off outputs all the time. So in this case, we got the new SaaS layer nobody's building yet. Stop building workflows, start building skills. Why your AI agent is only as good as its skills. The skill that will separate AI winners from AI tourists. I train my AI agent to get better every time I use it. And although I'm not a fan of the sentence here, I think this is the strongest angle. Skill engineering is where prompt engineering was in 2022. Now, I don't want it to write the newsletter right away. I want to have one more step in between. So let's say something like, let's go with angle 4. Now let's first define the high-level outline of sections that we can cover in this newsletter. Give me 3 suggestions on high-level outline of sections we can cover. But before doing that, please read my newsletter example doc to get a better understanding of how my newsletters are normally structured. Again, I give it more context on how I normally write my newsletters, how they're structured, etc., by giving it simply a document with some examples of my past newsletters. Now, this is one of the most important documents you can have for any copywriting skills, just giving examples of good outcomes or outputs of your copywriting style, right? So you really want to prepare that to get good copywriting skills. So you can see outline A, the skill gap story, personal narrative, so vulnerable opening. Outline B is software is being rewritten, a bold opener, skills and plugins are a new software layer, and outline C, before-after contrast. Let's go with C. And now we're going to actually write the newsletter, and here is where the reference docs become really important. Now, let's actually start writing the newsletter. First, I want you to follow the exact style and tone of voice of the example documents. Almost mimic it. Saying almost mimic it, in my experience, really works to get the output even closer to your tone of voice. And I would usually say something like this too. Also, almost mimic the sentence structure, sentence length, and styling from the examples. I want you to base claims based on what I said in the video, not make them up yourself. Now, another really important reference doc to have for copywriting tasks or skills is a voice personality. And in your voice personality guide, it basically lists out your tone of voice attributes, the message people should carry away, the key misconceptions my audience have, my signature phrases, etc. Again, this one is available in link in the description below, so you can adapt it to your tone of voice and style. But this really helps in my experience to get that tone of voice close to yours. So I also say something like, I want you to closely follow the voice personality guide when writing the newsletter. Then another reference doc I very commonly use is a personal background document. This basically lays out my entire life story in like 4 or 5 pages, what I've done in the past, what I've failed at, interesting stories or books I've read that have inspired me and things like this. And this is really important because it can make personal reference stories from this document. So I'd say something like, also read my personal background doc to get more context on me, my background, and potentially some stories you could use, if appropriate, in this newsletter. And then lastly, I would want to say, also reread my ICP document and my newsletter strategy document to know the strategy and my ICP in detail. And then lastly, I would say something to make sure it really reads those files is, before outputting the newsletter, please review and check the newsletter output across all the above references and guidelines to make sure it adheres to my tone of voice and style. I'll then give it all the reference docs, ICP it already had, so the verse personality, my profile background. And then I forgot one more thing. I didn't give a document on actually what my business is about, which is another important reference doc. And I would say something like, to get more understanding around my business and to create a good call to action, please read the What We Do doc. So I'd give it access to that one too, to understand what my business is about. So now we can fire that off. And again, as you can see, I put quite a lot of thought generally when working together with Claude Cowork. But the whole point of this is, once I put some thought in and this actually works well, I have a skill which I can then reuse over and over again. So I never have to give it this context again or start instructing it with these specific things again. So it's important to put some effort into actually making good skills, because anyone can build skills now in 3 seconds by just telling Claude to build a skill, but there are going to be very few people who actually build good skills. And those are the ones who are really going to leverage this software to become a lot more productive. So now we got the output, skill engineering with subject line options. I ran the same input through different AI skills last week. Same content, same model, same prompt. The first output, generic, flat, something you'd scroll past without thinking twice. The second, clean, on brand, the kind of infographic that actually makes people stop. The only difference between those 2 outputs was how well I built the skill. Now I can already tell you, and if you know my newsletter, this is the kind of style that I use. Short sentences. I start usually with a personal story. It's structured in a very similar way with these headers. It compared it to prompt engineering. So it follows the structures of my newsletter very well. Usually I end up on an inspirational note, which it did in a similar way. the skills and plugins that make agents do specific work. 1% are building the infrastructure layer. The 1% will have an advantage that compounds every time they use it. And usually I end it with a call to action to my community, which in this case it did. Ben, the accelerator is $97 a month, less than 1 hour of mediocre consulting. You get 100 plus battle tested templates, all the skills and plugins we build, weekly Q&As. So it has that context around what my business does. Now, this would be a good enough output for me to build a skill around, but I would add one more step to the process, which is please give me 10 options for subject lines based on the example document where you can find how I write my subject lines. Remember that most of my subject lines are in small caps to make them look personal and usually get higher open rates. So I'll do that as the last step, and then we're going to create a skill out of this. Now, I'd say these subject lines are too long, and that's the whole point. Any corrections we give here during this initial process will be saved in the skill later, so you won't make that same mistake again. I want my subject lines to be between 3 to 8 words. These are too long. So good, we got the final newsletter, and now, of course, we're going to build the skill out of it. Now, it's also important how to instruct it to build the skill out of this process. Okay, now let's build a skill out of this. The name of the skill should be Ben's newsletter writer. It should trigger every time that I mention that I want to write a newsletter. It has to follow the exact step-by-step process that we just did above. It should include all the reference files that I've added in this chat. And besides this process, I want to add one more step all the way at the start, which is asking me what the source of the newsletter is going to be. There are going to be 3 sources. It can either be from an idea or insight. It can be from an article, or it can be from a YouTube video. It should ask me which one it is. If it's from an article, it should use the Apify web scraper to scrape the article to get the full context in the article. Now, some best practices that I recommend you prompt it here when you're creating the skill is, first of all, you want to double down on the reference files. Otherwise, it might skip over that in the skill. So I want to make it obligatory in the skill to always read those reference files at the exact point we did this in the above process. It cannot skip over that. Another one that's good to double down on is any corrections that are added in this process above. Please add those as rules in the skill.md so it doesn't make that same mistake again. Lastly, what we can do with skills is make them self-learning. Also add a progressive update feature in the skill where every time a user, when using the skill, says to not do something anymore, automatically let the skill update itself with the new rule. And this is essentially how we make the skill almost self-learning, because it can automatically update when you say it to not do something. So from that, Claude will start building the skill. And again, a skill really is never finished. We can still update it every time we use it. And that's really the point of it. The more we use it, the better our skills get. But this is the way to get to a good first output that becomes reliable to actually reuse over and over again and to improve over time. Now you can see it now reach the skill creator skill to build a skill out of this. So now it's built the entire skill. As you can see in the skill.md, it's basically an overview of the skill and the process it has to follow. So you can see, identify the source, read reference files, suggest 5 angles, read more reference files, suggest 3 outlines, write newsletter, and suggest 10 subject lines. And as you can see, it also stored all of these reference files into the skill. So next time I use this, it will already have access to those. I can now just click copy to your skills, and now these skills will be saved into my account. So if I go here to customize, you'll see that it appears here in skills. And now all I have to do is, if I want to use this automation or skill again, is by going through a / command or just saying, please, I want to write another newsletter, use my Ben's newsletter writer skill. So lastly, what you want to do before using this skill and automation is to test it once, make sure it actually works. Now, Claude now has a built-in feature that can automatically test. So how will we do it? We would say something like, Claude, please just test this skill now. Now, generally, when you want to test, you want to also define what you want to optimize this test for, right? What criteria does it have to test? So in this case, I would say I want to optimize this test for making sure the newsletter adheres to my tone of voice and style as closely as possible. And then you can also define the criteria to test upon. So in this case, I would say something like, the criteria for the test are, first of all, is the skill functional? Second, is the word count similar to my newsletter examples? Is the sentence structure similar? Is the tone of voice similar? And then we can also define how the test should be done. So we can say something like, please run 3 test variations based on this YouTube link. I'll paste that same link, and now we'll run a test. So I now finished the test. It basically span up 3 agents to do tests in parallel. And you can see that criteria 1, it passed all 3. It's functional. The word count, 1 of them failed. And criteria 3, the sentence structure, 2 of them actually failed. So we can see a full report of the test results here and the outputs. But it already gives me suggestions on how to improve this skill based on my criteria. So it recommends adding 2 skill rule updates. So I can just tell Claude now, please update the skill according to the rules you suggested. And this is basically a really easy way to let Claude update and improve your skills really fast, because we can test and optimize based on any criteria. So we can go back again a few times back and forth to really get your skill to the next level. So now it updated the skill with the roles. I can just click on copy to your skills and upload and replace, and it will make a new version of the skill. And now I can do this exact process again by just going to a slash command and typing in the skill, or I can just tell Claude, please use my Ben's newsletter writer skill to write a newsletter. Now, let's say now I'll share an article. It'll follow the exact same process. You can see it used Apify to scrape the link, and now it follows the process. Let me read the reference files before suggesting angles. So it gives me the 5 angles, exactly like the original process. Let's say I go 4. Now again, this is a human in the loop process, but of course you can make this into a non-human in the loop process also. Again, gives me 3 outline options. Let's say A. Now gave me the full newsletter. When I first heard about AI automation tools, I thought it was for developers. I was the CMO of a 25-person SaaS company. So I used personal stories from my reference files. It span it up into a version that's relevant for my audience. Of course, I'd probably go back and forth a few times or change some things manually, but this can really help you get to good copy a lot faster. And the amazing thing with these skills is I can now give team members in my team access to my copywriting skills. And even though they have no marketing background or understanding around me, they can come up with very good drafts of newsletters, LinkedIn posts, etc., according to my tone of voice and style. And I've built skills like this around all my copywriting tasks. For example, you have a LinkedIn writer with a very similar process. So you can see I invoked the LinkedIn writer with a YouTube link. In this case, it gave me 10 angles for the LinkedIn post, then gave me suggestions for the writing frameworks, then suggestions for the hooks, and then a LinkedIn post in my style. And you can see that my LinkedIn skill has very similar reference docs. My profile background, my ICP, examples, but in this case for LinkedIn, voice personality, what we do, and in this case one more, which is a hook template document. So yes, it is a little bit of work creating these context documents, but it's going to save you a lot of time in the long run. I also have a copywriting skill for YouTube intros, for example. Let's write an intro for YouTube. Please load the skill, which goes through the process of writing a good intro, and it gives me a YouTube intro according to my process. Now, most of my copywriting skills have human in the loop because that's how I like to work with AI, but you can also, of course, make this completely autonomous and get good draft outputs, which you can iterate on. And if you do that, you can also start scheduling your tasks, because the next thing you can start doing with your skills is to schedule them automatically. So you could say, for example, to schedule my newsletter writing skill every morning at 8 a.m., check if there's new YouTube videos on my channel and automatically repurpose them into a newsletter. So when I wake up in the morning, I already have a draft email newsletter prepared. And I'll give some examples in the ideation part on how to use this scheduling feature. We can also start bundling different skills after each other to automate even more complex workflows. For example, in this chat, I bundled the LinkedIn post writer, a GIF creator, and a newsletter writer in the same chat. So you can see from one YouTube link, we get a LinkedIn post, a GIF, and a newsletter all in the same chat. And this was of course impossible with custom projects, etc. Now I'll show you later how to bundle multiple of these skills into commands to automate even more complex tasks. But first, let me show you how you do brand aligned visuals. Now we can also use Cowork and build skills around any brand aligned visuals we need. For example, around infographics, ads, brand aligned dashboards, GIFs, presentations, anything you can imagine. For example, here I created a skill around building brand aligned case studies from a client transcript. So you can see this is aligned to my colors of my brand, to my style, etc. So if you look at my website, it's the same style. And here I created a skill to create brand aligned infographics for LinkedIn. So how do you go about building these brand aligned visual assets? I'll show you by going through an example of how I build my infographic skill. But before that, very quickly, if you want access to all of the skills we're building out, more than 40 we have right now, you can also check out my AI community, where we list them all out for you to customize and maybe help you speed up building some of these skills a little bit faster. Also, we do weekly AI workshops where we dive a lot deeper into these tools and have unlimited one-on-one live tech help available to help you set up things like this. So if that's interesting, you can check it out in the link in the description below. So you can see the approach I took for the LinkedIn infographic creator skill is very similar to the one I showed for the copywriting, right? So I just went and did the process once. For example, here I said, okay, I want to turn this LinkedIn post into an infographic image for LinkedIn. I threw in the LinkedIn post, and then I told it, first give me 5 suggestions on which part of this post would make the strongest visual. So it gave me 5 suggestions. I chose option 2, and then I asked it, now give me 5 specific ways this could be visualized best inside of an infographic so we can choose a good way to visualize this concept. And again, I do this because I don't want one-off outputs or an immediate infographic, because in general, in my experience, with a few of these decision points or human in the loop points, the output gets a lot better, a lot faster. And eventually, when your skills getting better and better, maybe you can start taking out some of these human in the loop steps to make it more and more autonomous. So it gave me 5 different ways to visualize it. I chose the first one, suggests me 3 different ways the copies can be structured. It gave me options for copy. Then I picked one and added one more detail. And then I asked it to generate the infographic. Now, Claude is not capable of actually generating PNGs, so I use Nano Banana. And Nano Banana is Google's image model, and in general is by far the best still. So highly recommend, if you're trying to create images or maybe ads or infographics like this, is to use the Google Nano Banana MCP. Now, in this case, I told it, okay, now let's generate the prompt for Nano Banana and use Nano Banana MCP to generate the infographic, because of course it has to prompt Nano Banana to generate the infographic. I want you to use the brand guidelines of my brand here below to know how to prompt Nano Banana to generate the infographic that we defined above in my style. Now, this is the key document you want to have for anything you want to do with visual assets. If you want to have a brand guideline to make sure that any visual you create will follow your brand. Now, I've experimented a lot with this too. I found a good sort of template that you can fill out. Again, it will be available in the link in the description below, and adapt just in a chat together with Claude. You can also give it your website, for example, or any asset you have, so it can sort of start filling out itself. But once you have that, it's going to be a game changer, because anything you do, right, generating presentations, dashboard, etc., all you have to do is add the brand guidelines into the skill, or give it access to the brand guideline, and it will do it in your brand style. So I added the brand guidelines in the prompt, and I added in the MCP instructions for using the Nano Banana Google Image Generator, which I'll make sure to add in the free resources too. So you can just paste that in so Claude knows how to use the Google Nano Banana MCP. It then asked me for my Gemini API key, which of course we need to generate images from Google Nano Banana. Highly recommend to do it if you're gonna plan to create any images together with Claude COWORK. So you can go into the Google AI Studio and just click here on Get an API Key. You have some free credits, but then you have to add in your billing information. Again, it's not very expensive to generate an image, and it's definitely worth it if you're going to do this. And then it created a prompt for Nano Banana, as you can see here. And then it generated the infographic using the tool. And you can see it follows my brand pretty well. It's not perfect yet. Probably have to make some changes here on the style, but this was a good first version. So I said, now build a skill out of this exact process that we followed. It should be called this and triggered when I say this. But before this process, I want you to add 2 more steps to the skill. First, I want it should ask the user for the content or idea it should generate these infographics on, and then it should ask the user for which platform this infographic is going to be generated to apply the right format for the image to it. Then I asked it that to make a reference file out of the brand style guide and a guide on how to prompt the Nano Banana MCP in order to get a good output. Now, this is key. When we give it a lot of context, for example, on the Nano Banana MCP or a brand guideline without a docs, then we have to ask Claude to create a separate reference file for it. Why is that? It's because we want to keep the skill MD as clean as possible. So all the extra informational context should be stored as reference files in a skill, and the skill MD should mostly focus on the step-by-step process it has to follow. That's how your skills are going to perform best. And I doubled down on that rule that I usually use. Make sure to clearly make it obligatory steps in the skill to read those reference files in order to ensure good outputs. Again, add in a progressive update rule that makes the skill automatically update itself when a user specifies something not to do anymore. So again, it created the skill, as you can see here, and 2 different, I copied that to the skill. Then I kept updating the skill probably around 5 to 10 times until it got so good that almost every time a new infographic is generated, it's good enough for me to use. And as you can see, my last version here, the infographic V2, has a lot more reference files because I've started giving it more and more context around doing a better job, and therefore it became more and more complex and more information. And that's really the key with these skills, right? They're never really finished. The more you work with it, the better they get and the more extensive they get. So you can start with something simple, but it's really about just using it. I've also set up skills for branded Excalibur presentations, as you can see here. These basically generate slides automatically from YouTube transcripts or outlines. And as you can see, again, it uses my colors of my brand, the shadows of my brand, etc. Now, for most visual assets we want to create, we don't actually need any external connectors because Claude can now generate presentations in PPT and Google Slide format. Without these connectors, it will be able to generate HTML in your style. So any dashboard you want to visualize, I'll show you an example of that in a second. Excalibur, if you use it, you can do it right from within Claude because it's based on JSON. So you can just copy the JSON into Excalibur and have your slides. The only thing Claude is not capable of is generating PNG. So that's where you want to set up the Google Nano Banana MCP connector. So that's the one that I set up here in the connectors. Again, in the free resources, I'll give you a guide on how to set up this Nano Banana MCP. And again, if you want to copy all of the skills that I'm showing here and all of the other skills we have, you can also check out my AI community if that's interesting to you. Before moving on to how you use Claude for ideation and research, very quickly, let me go over commands. You can see that here inside of customization, we have different plugins for marketing, sales, operations, etc. And these plugins you can basically just see as ways to organize and distribute a bundle of skills, connectors, and commands. For example, I can share this creative plugin with one of my teammates, and when he imports it, he'll already have the Nano Banana MCP, all the skills inside of this plugin, and my commands. Now, what are these commands? If I look here in the marketing one, commands basically allow us to make even more complex automations because inside of a command, we can lay out the process of using multiple skills in sequence. For example, here in the marketing plugin here, I have one command set up for repurposing, and this one combines the LinkedIn writer, the newsletter writer, the Excalibur, the GIF creator, and the infographic creator into one workflow. So if I trigger this command, it'll be able to automatically repurpose for my LinkedIn, for my newsletter, and use the visual creators to generate visuals for them right away. And all this basically is one text file that maps out the process with multiple skills. You can invoke a command exactly the same way as I would do with a skill through the slash command with repurpose, or by just telling Claude, please repurpose my content. I can build commands the exact same way as we build skills. I can just open a chat and say, hey, please build me a command. And then you can instruct the process to follow in this command and which skills to use. And then we can even start scheduling these commands and skills automatically through scheduled tasks, which I'll show you an example of in Ideation. But generally, I recommend building these commands only when you have built some skills already and you want to get to the next level of complexity. But you can see that you can really start to do more and more complex automations right inside Claude Cowork. And by the way, the same is the case for these plugins. We can just tell Claude to build you a plugin. So you can just define all the skills, the commands and connectors you want to include, and Claude can then generate you the plugin, which you can then later share to other people or people on your team. I have a full video that also covers plugins entirely. So if you want to learn more about that, you can check it in the link in the description below too. Now let's move to ideation and research, which of course are big parts of marketing and what Claude Cowork can really start automating right now. For example, I've been using this for ideation for my newsletter and for YouTube by tracking news updates, competitors, but can really be used for any ideation or research task that you might have. Now, let me show you an example of how I've built a skill out of my newsletter ideation process and how I then scheduled this into a scheduled task to do on a daily basis automatically. So in this use case, I said I'm trying to ideate for my newsletter. Inside the newsletter ideation folder, you will find our ideal customer profile and our newsletter strategy. So this is another thing you can do in Claude Cowork is instead of passing it through the documents that it needs to read each time, you can also just save those in a specific folder and just give Claude access to that specific folder. For example, I have a folder here with AI context copy. I just give it that, and then it already has access to all those files. So that's another way to do it. So I gave it access to that folder in this chat. Then I said, I'm going to paste in some resources that you can explore to extract information. Basically, the idea is that you need to navigate through and identify the latest pieces of content that have been published there in the last 24 hours and qualify them as relevant or irrelevant for our ICP and my newsletter strategy. So you can see here at the bottom, I gave it 5 resources that I normally read or use and give me inspiration for potential newsletters or YouTube videos. Now, again, here's where the Apify MCP can come in really handy because, of course, we can also start tracking competitor posts on LinkedIn, YouTube, etc. with the Apify MCP. Now, in this case, the sources I gave it were websites like A16Z and Anthropic. And basically, I asked it to, based on my newsletter strategy, identify if there are potentially interesting new updates on these websites that I could make a newsletter about. I gave it a little bit more context. And then I said, what I want as an output is a well-structured HTML report that I can open in my Chrome to see what all the content ideas I can create newsletters around from these sources. It then started going through the websites and all the new content pieces they published. And it found 7 potential newsletter ideas and added it in an HTML report or dashboard, which I can open in my browser. As you can see, I get a nice dashboard. And of course, you can make this branded too, if you want, by giving it the brand guidelines. So as you can see, it gives me an overview of all the new content published on these sources, if they're relevant potentially for a newsletter or not. Here it gives me full newsletter ideas and potentially interesting stats to share in my newsletter and potentially interesting infographics that I could add in this newsletter. And then because I was going to plan to make this a scheduled task and I don't want to have duplicates, we actually need a database so it can track and make sure that it doesn't make duplicates all the time. What I asked it to do is I plan on running this every 48 hours. And to ensure that we do not go over the same content over and over again, we need a database of all the sources that we have used in the past. So please create a CSV that consists of all the qualified sources and unqualified sources with the date. What I would like to see in the database is a source name, the source URL, the date, the execution time, whether it was qualified or unqualified. And then whenever this workflow runs again, it first checks the database to know what it's already looked at and can then skip those sources already. And it's basically how we can build databases inside of Claude Cowork is by just telling it to make a CSV or an Excel file. So you can see it made a newsletter source database with all the different columns that I instructed. And now I created a skill out of this exact process, just like I showed you before. It then created the skill and added in the database as a reference file. And the really powerful thing with Claude Cowork we can now do is schedule these tasks or skills automatically on a daily basis, for example. I can either just tell Claude here, please schedule this skill every day at 8 a.m. to run automatically. Or I can go into the schedule section here and set up a scheduled task. So here I can say, for example, newsletter ideation, ideates on my newsletter. And then in the prompt, I just tell it which skill to use. Use the newsletter ideation skill to ideate for my newsletter. And this basically schedules a prompt every day at 8 a.m. The skill will already know to go through the database to make sure it doesn't do duplicates. And every morning I can open my Cowork and already get ideas for my content. I can define the frequency, the folder it can access. So in this case, I could give it access to that context folder. So I don't even need to save it inside of the skill. And I can define the model, Opus 4 or Sonnet. So I could, let's say, daily at 8 a.m. I could save this. And now it's scheduled every day at 8 a.m. And this is sort of how you can make Claude Cowork become proactive. You can open up your Claude desktop in the morning and go through your scheduled tasks. And you can imagine if you start bundling the newsletter ideation with the newsletter writing and the visual creator skill into a command and run it on autopilot, you can start to automate more and more autonomously together with Claude Cowork. You can see that the scheduled task will be on a separate tab here in scheduled. It already loaded the skill here to know exactly how to do this process and the progress bar here. Now with Claude Cowork, we can also completely automate our data analysis and reporting of analytics, for example, for SEO reporting, meta ad reporting, in my case, YouTube Studio data analysis, but any marketing analysis you can do because we have built-in skills now from Anthropic on being able to read Excel files, being able to create these brand aligned presentations or dashboards. We can build skills out of them, schedule them on a monthly or weekly basis, and completely automate our data analysis workflows. For example, here I created a skill around my YouTube analytics. I gave it a CSV file of my YouTube Studio analytics, and it gave me suggestions on what data analytics could be useful for me. I then asked it to create a dashboard, again, in that HTML structure using the front-end design skill, which is a built-in skill from Anthropic. And because it also has access to my YouTube scraper, it can also analyze my transcripts and give me conclusions on what I do in my intros, for example, for my best performing videos. It then again created a full dashboard with a complete overview of my total views, top 10 videos by views, engagement, the top videos with the top like rate and the top comment rate and share rate, which videos have the highest subscriber conversions, and CTR, monthly upload frequency. And by comparing the data with my transcripts, it could also identify which video length is optimal. My best opening hooks, for example, they include numbers and statistics generally, and the best performing type of videos, how-to tutorials. Then again, I can build a skill out of this that runs every month to analyze my past month's YouTube videos and give me good insights. So for any repetitive analytics or reporting tasks you might have around marketing, again, you can build skills out of them and just schedule them on a weekly or monthly basis and automate these tasks entirely. And lastly, if you do SEO, we can now automate large parts of our SEO workflows. We've built skills around programmatic SEO, SEO audits, and SEO optimizing. Now, some of these, like programmatic SEO and SEO optimizing, are pretty comprehensive skills that actually work best when used in Claude Code. I'll soon do a full video on using Claude Cowork and Claude Code for SEO, but let me show you a quick example. Here, for example, I run our SEO audit skill that does a full audit around legal compliance, performance, EEAT, content, and geo readiness. It then gives me a full report with action items on how to improve geo and SEO for my website or any other website you would want to run this on. It gives an overview of the categories and what needs to be improved, critical issues that needs to be fixed immediately, the medium priorities and high priorities, and quick wins that you can implement fast. Now, this skill combined with our SEO optimizer and the Webflow MCP, where my website is hosted, can almost autonomously keep our site geo and SEO optimized. Again, this is a little bit more technical and SEO specific, so I'll do a full video on SEO soon. But if you're a marketing or SEO agency, onboarding your team on Claude Code or Cowork and starting to become good at building skills out of the common workflows and services you provide should be one of your top priorities right now. So now that you've seen some marketing use cases, let me show you another few use cases for sales. Claude Cowork can really entirely transform the way you do sales. So in this next section, I'll cover plenty of use cases and skills to automate your sales processes. So let's start with using Cowork for prospecting, lead qualification, and research. Now, as most people have unique prospecting workflows, I'll just show you an example of a prospecting skill we've built, how we've built it, and the connectors that are most useful for prospecting, because I think it will give you a good idea of how to do this for your own workflows. For example, here I built a skill out of a workflow that can scrape LinkedIn post engagers, qualify them against my ICP, and enrich the qualified leads, and even do personalized outreach on LinkedIn. So you see here, I called the skill by just using a slash command here with LinkedIn post engagers. That's how we can use skills, by just using the slash and using the skill here. Then I added someone else's LinkedIn post to scrape the engagers from, and I added the qualification criteria. And because the skill already has the workflow on how to do this embedded, it already went ahead and found the last LinkedIn post of Chris Long. It then scraped all the engagers from that post using Apify and identified 127 unique engagers. 17 were qualified according to my criteria. It also enriched the data with the company size, a company description, and the LinkedIn post they engaged with. And it gave me the information of those leads with the enriched data in a CSV sheet, as you can see here. So we have the LinkedIn public URL, the about, the company size, the company website, company description, and the post they engaged with. Now this skill stops here, but we can now run another skill to actually make personalized outreach messages and actually do the outreach on LinkedIn. Now the point of this is you can build skills like this for any repetitive prospecting, qualification, or research workflow you might have through building these skills. And I'll show you in a second how I built this one. But whether you get prospects or data from LinkedIn, Google Maps, Apollo, your CRM, or any other social media, we do need the right connectors to actually let Claude access the data on these platforms. So the key connectors you want to have installed in Claude Cowork for any prospecting, research, or outreach task is, first of all, Apify. If you don't know Apify, Apify is basically a marketplace with scrapers that can scrape any social media like LinkedIn profiles, LinkedIn posts, LinkedIn post engagers, X, Instagram, or any other social media. They can even scrape some lead databases like Apollo. So this is really one of the most important to install for any lead prospecting or lead enrichment. You can start for free with Apify, and they also have a native integration with Claude Cowork. You can just set up new connections by going here to the plus sign and go to browse connections, and then I can choose Apify and you can do the setup. You can also connect it with, for example, Apollo or any other lead database you might use. You can now also connect it with Clay, as they have a native integration if you use Clay. And another one that's really interesting to explore if you're looking for lead data is Vibe Prospecting, which is an API purely made to give to AI agents to provide you with more data on leads. And if you do outreach, you can connect it to your email outreach platform like instantly. Or if you do LinkedIn outreach, I recommend using the Unipal connection, which can automate outreach on LinkedIn, WhatsApp, Facebook, and X for you. Of course, for some of the other sales skills that I'm going to show you, a connection with your CRM, in my case, Atio, is of course very important. And what I highly recommend is to have a meeting transcriber, in my case, Fireflies. And lastly, of course, you want to have it connected to probably your calendar and your email. So how did I build that skill that I showed you? I basically went through the workflow once together with Claude and then asked it to build a skill out of it. So it already knows and went through the process and knows what to save as the workflow. So here I said, I want you to scrape the most recent 10 posts of Ben's profile, extract the post commenters and engagers data and present them in CSV along with the link profile URL, name, headline, and the post that they engaged with. In this case, I specified the specific Apify scraper that it should use, but it can figure this out itself too. In this case, I already knew, so I specified it to make the process a bit quicker. I then gave it my LinkedIn profile to scrape the post from. It then went ahead and used the Apify scraper to scrape the post engagers, and it found 154 unique people who engage with this post. Then, of course, I want to qualify these according to my ICP criteria. I then noticed it didn't actually use the LinkedIn scraper to base the qualification on, so I specified to use an Apify scraper to scrape the LinkedIn and get specific data points like the About section, company name, and website. And that's the point of giving these instructions. If you do it once, then build a skill, it will already know how to do it next time, so you don't have to correct it. It then actually scraped the LinkedIn profiles and created an enriched CSV with potential leads for my business. And then I asked it to build a skill out of this process, and I gave it a little bit of extra context on how the skill should be built. Claude then built the skill, as you can see here, which you can add to your library. And as you can see here in the skill itself, which is just an MD file in this case, it's just a step-by-step process on how to do this and which scrapers from Apify to use, for example. You can see step 1, scrape post with engagement data, use this Apify actor. Step 2, extract and deduplicate engagers. Step 3, ICP qualification. And step 4, full LinkedIn profile scrape. And step 5, company LinkedIn profile scrape. And lastly, the final output, which is in a CSV. You can, of course, add steps here where you actually generate personalized outreach messages, but we have these separated into different skills. Now, the second use case we've been using it for is lead nurturing and follow-ups. Often some of the low-hanging fruit are just leads that were lost or not properly followed up with before. So we built a skill that's called Prospect Miner, and it basically goes through the lost lead column of our CRM. And it researches all of these leads, scrapes their LinkedIn, and prioritizes them based on our ICP criteria, and checks all the email communications we had with this lead to understand how we could follow up. So here I said, run the CRM prospect mining skill for my CRM. It then asked me for my criteria to find potential opportunities. I gave it the criteria. It then found 160 records in that column. It then researched these leads and found their LinkedIn profile and started scraping their LinkedIn profiles with Apify again. And then it went through the email communications to identify the last communications with each of these clients. And it gave me a CSV sheet prioritizing the lost leads based on company size and my ICP criteria, and the comms communication summary. Again, based on this, of course, we can start drafting potential follow-up messages and actually send them out through the Gmail connector. So for this one specifically, we use the Gmail, Apify, and our CRM connector, which is Atio in our case. So how do we build this one? Again, same thing. We just did the process once together with Claude and asked it to create a skill around it. So I just told it here to go through Atio, my CRM. It's wrongly spelled, but it understood. Told it what to do. And I also told it to launch sub-agents for this and give each sub-agent 15 leads to analyze. Now, this is important when you're running bulk tasks. You can now run sub-agents also in Claude Cowork, and the big advantage of this is these sub-agents can run in parallel, and this means that the context window here doesn't get overloaded because a lot of the research is done by these sub-agents, and because they run in parallel, it can be done far faster. And this is a big advantage we have in Cowork now too. We can actually run bulk tasks on lead list of 100 to 200, which was previously hard to do with the normal Claude chat. But you do sometimes have to specifically mention to use sub-agents when you're running bulk tasks. And then again, I asked it here I need to create a skill around this process with some extra context. And it gave me the CRM prospect mining skill, which I can just copy to my library. Now, the third use case that I think is very useful, especially with the new feature in Cowork of scheduled task, which I'll show you in a second, is the call preparation skill, which is one we customized from Anthropic Skills. So you can see here, I run the call prep for my meeting with a client on Monday. The skill then used my CRM to find a lead and then started researching the email communications with this lead, any past Fireflies transcripts, and researching the lead on the web. And then based on the research it did, it gave me a call prep brief in HTML format, which is a nice sort of dashboard here with the company overview, an account snapshot, what they do, the interaction history, the suggested agenda, and discovery question suggestions. Now, of course, we can customize this skill from Anthropic by adding more data on how you want your call preps to be structured, what data points you should look for in the research, etc. Now, you can customize these Anthropic built-in skills really easily by just telling Claude. For example, you can say, I want to customize the Anthropic call prep skill according to how my company does call preps. You can then give it all the context you need and what you want to change, and Claude can then instantly create a new skill that's adapted and customized to your specific way of working. Now, these kinds of use cases become especially powerful now that we have scheduled tasks here in the sidebar in Cowork. And here we can basically schedule our skills or task to run at a specific time interval. For example, every morning at 7 a.m. So for this one, I could say something like every morning at 7 a.m., check my CRM and go through all of the meetings I have today and use the call prep skill for each of the meetings I have today, present all the call prep briefs in a nice HTML dashboard for me to go through every morning. I can then decide the frequency daily at 7 a.m. And as soon as you open your Cowork in the morning, you'll start running this skill and preparing all your calls for today. Then for sales analytics, Claude Cowork can become really powerful too. For example, we've used it for win-loss analysis and sales rep performance analysis. You can see here, I run it by calling the win-loss analysis skill. And this skill basically goes through all of our leads in our win column and in our loss column in our CRM. It researches both of these types of leads, but also the meeting transcripts from all of these leads and the email communication. And based on that, it makes an extremely comprehensive win-loss analysis report in a Google Docs that gives us an overview of the win rate, the key findings of our best and worst performing customer profiles, common objections, patterns on actions we tend to take with converted leads, like engagement depth predicts outcomes. It shows us deals won and lost by company type and by pricing, gives us case studies on won leads and why they were won. It does a full analysis on lost deals. And you can see that we have to get far better at follow-up, so which Cowork will hopefully help us with. Then the key differentiators between won versus lost deals, and red flags and early disqualification criteria. For us, honestly, this was extremely insightful and pretty impressive to read this report. And of course, we can now run this through scheduled tasks on a monthly basis to analyze our wins and losses over the last month. And again, this one was built by just doing the process once manually with Claude and then saving it as a skill at the end. And one more sales analysis skill we built is for a sales rep performance analytics by going through past transcripts, CRM data, and their email communication. So here I ran that skill on one of our sales reps and it gave me a full Google Docs with a full performance report. So it gives an overall grade, the top 3 strengths, the top 3 improvement areas, and a full performance scorecard per client. It also grades across different stages in the sales pipeline, like discovery, demo, objection handling, pricing, follow-ups, etc. And the top 5 recommendations for this sales rep to start focusing on improving. Then lastly, I think another very useful one for most sales reps is the review sales pipeline skill, which we also customized from Anthropic's built-in skills. Now, this can be very useful to run on a daily basis too with scheduled tasks, because you can basically check your pipeline on a day-to-day basis and give you a brief on all the important leads to focus on today by analyzing your sales pipeline, email communication, and past transcripts. So you see why these connectors become so important, because you give Claude all the context it needs to actually come up with really strategic advice for you. So here I ran it with the pipeline review command, and then it asked me questions on which pipeline it should review, what stage I want to focus on, and where to send the pipeline summary. In this case, I told it to DM me on Slack. It then sent me a full report to Slack and also presented here in the chat. And it basically gives me an overview of the leads I have to focus on today because they're hot or we might risk losing them. You can also adapt this to even include pipeline hygiene. So it can automatically start updating your pipeline, which is of course a big pain point for anyone who's in sales, because it can now analyze your email communications, your transcripts, and the pipeline itself. it can make your pipeline automatically update itself when changes happen. But I think you get the point. You can really start automating any repetitive tasks you have around sales. I really highly recommend starting to experiment more and more with Cowork and building skills, because it's really going to make a big impact on your productivity. Now, lastly, there's one more thing I want to cover that ties everything together. Throughout this course, I've talked a lot about the importance of giving Claude the right context. And in this last section, I'll take that up a notch and show you how to connect Obsidian to Claude Cowork to essentially give your AI agent a second brain. And this really allows Cowork to become your main operating system or interface for doing work. This setup will essentially give Claude unlimited memory, persistent context across every conversation, and it's especially interesting for businesses because it can be scaled across teams. So in this last part, I'll walk you through the main advantages of this setup and show you an easy way to get started with this today. Now, before showing you how this works, how to set it up, and why I recommend starting with this today, let me quickly go over the 5 big advantages with some examples of having a second brain. Now, the first one is the most obvious one, and it's persistent context. Right now, most people use AI in isolated conversations. You have to re-explain everything in each chat about your situation, your project, your workflows, etc. And with a second brain, your AI agent has persistent access to all of this context. And not just a few facts, but detailed context around everything. You can see in my Obsidian, I have context saved around everything: my business, my strategy, my projects, my brand, my workflows, my team, about myself, my meetings, literally everything. And here in this graph view, we can see the relationships between all of these documents. For example, my AI Accelerator here, and here's me. Now, I'll show you later how this actually works and how to set this up. But because of this, I can now open a new chat session with, for example, Claude Cowork, and ask something like, what should I focus on today? It's already connected to my knowledge, Obsidian Vault, how they call it. And you can see Claude now pulls my context to give me an answer. And because it pulled this context, it now knows that my main priority should be landing page copy changes, recording the Obsidian video, and organizing the Spain offsite in April. I could even ask it things like, write me a LinkedIn post based on AI topics we discussed in our team meetings this week. Use the LinkedIn instant skill. It will now go through our team meetings, see what AI topics we discussed, and use a LinkedIn skill to actually write it in my tone of voice. It then pulls the context from my second brain, uses the skill, and then output a LinkedIn post according to the topic we discussed, which is of course this second brain topic. This week, my team and I built something different. We created a second brain for our entire business. Now, this is just an example, but you can see the power of this. And with the new scheduled task feature, this becomes even more powerful. Secondly, besides Cowork now always being able to pull up-to-date and complete context around me and my business in any chat, it can also directly update the context in my second brain. So any decision, any rule, any project update I make in an AI chat, it can log it directly back into my second brain. For example, if I see something in this LinkedIn skill that I don't like, for example, never use M dashes when writing content for me, I can say something like, remember this in my second brain or in my AI operating system. You can see it now saved and updated this in my second brain as a role in the writing preferences. Now, this is huge because it means the more you and your team use AI to do tasks, the more context is built, the more guidelines it has, and the better your AI becomes for yourself and your entire team. Thirdly, there's also a big advantage of having this second brain when building and using skills. Now, if you don't know what skills are yet, skills are basically saved instructions for your AI agent on Claude Code or Claude Cowork on how to do a specific process or task. For example, in this LinkedIn skill, it goes through the step-by-step process of how to write a LinkedIn post in my style, and essentially allows these agents to automate workflows just like I showed you in the example. Now, I have a full video covering skills if you're still unfamiliar with it, which I'll make sure to link in the description below too. But what changes with this second brain? Skills usually have reference files and context inside the skill folder. For example, in this LinkedIn skill, I have a pen profile background document, a hook template document, an ICP document, a LinkedIn example document, and a voice personality document. Now, we use these reference files in skills, of course, to get to better outputs, but it usually takes a long time to provide all the context every new skill needs to get to a good output. And if you have all of the relevant context around your ICP, your tone of voice, your business already in your second brain, it means you can build good skills far faster. This means you only need to lay out the process and point it to the right context in your second brain, and you don't have to give it the exact same context over and over again for each new skill you're building. For example, I have dozens of skills that share reference files around my ICP, their pain points, what my business does, etc. As you can see, my newsletter writer skill shares a lot of the same context files as my LinkedIn one. So the new way I'm building out my skills with this second brain setup is not by adding this extra context or reference files in the skill itself, but by just pointing my skill to the right context in my second brain. For example, this is my new LinkedIn skill, the LinkedIn Instant. And in this case, you can see that I only have the skill MD, only the process instructions, and there I direct it to where I can find the specific context files in my second brain. And this means that any update I make to a reference file in my second brain, for example, in the ICP document, all of the skills that use this ICP document are instantly updated instead of me manually updating dozens of skills myself. It also means that this rule, for example, that I added, never use M dashes when writing content for me, is now updated as a rule in my writing preferences, which is one of the documents many of my content writing skills point towards. So my newsletter skill is automatically updated with this same rule. Now, another huge advantage of this setup, of course, is that it works across any AI you use. So your second brain in Obsidian is really just a folder of markdown files, which I'll explain in more detail in a second, but that's all it is. It's just a folder that I can now give Claude Cowork access to, I can give Claude Code access to, I can give Codex, Antigravity, or any other AI agent provider access to. For example, I can go to the Code tab or just use Claude Code in the terminal, give it access to the same folder of my second brain, the Ben AI OS, and I can ask the same question. What should I focus on today? And as you can see, Claude Code has access to the same context. As you can see, landing page copy, Obsidian video, and Spain offsite. And this even works across different AI providers. Here I gave Codex access to the same folder, asked it the same question. As you can see, landing page copy, YouTube production, and Spain offsite. And then lastly, which is huge if you're a business, is that this is not only for yourself, but can actually scale across your entire team and business. Me and my team now share this same second brain with my business strategy, ICP understanding, tone of voice references, company goals, etc. So instantly, my entire team's AI agents have access to this context that make them far more powerful and productive for my business. For example, my entire team will always have access to up-to-date strategy documents, ICP documents that their agents can instantly use. And with the context and skills that I've built, I can now let an engineer write my LinkedIn post with an on-point tone of voice. In Obsidian, I can sync these updates in my context across the entire team here. And you can imagine that this setup could completely change the way you run a business, which I'll get to later in this video. But let me first explain how this actually works, because it might look a little bit overwhelming and complicated, but it really is not. So what is Obsidian? All Obsidian really is just a visual overlay of a folder and its files on your computer. As you can see here, all these folders that I'm seeing in Obsidian, context, daily, departments, intelligence, onboarding, I also have available here in the folder that Obsidian is connected to. And all we really do is we point Claude Cowork, Claude Code, or Codex, or any other AI agent we use to the same folder on your computer so they can directly read and write to the same files you see in Obsidian. And that's why Obsidian is a great app to do this on, because we don't have to sync anything, use an API or an MCP or a cloud-based software. It's all local. So in Cowork, for example, all I do is give it access to that folder. But if we have thousands of these context files, how does our AI agent on Claude Cowork or Claude Code actually know what context to use, and how does it update it? Now, again, this is pretty simple. The way it updates and retrieves the right data from your Obsidian folder or vault is through the CLAUDE.md file. Now, the CLAUDE.md file is basically just an instruction you give to your AI agent on Claude Cowork or Claude Code on how to navigate the second brain or the folder. So if I ask Cowork a question like, what did we talk about in our team meeting yesterday? My AI agent, first of all, knows that it needs more context to answer this question. It then reads the CLAUDE.md file to understand where in my Obsidian vault or folder it will find more information around this. Then it reads those specific documents, like for example, yesterday's Fireflies transcript, to answer the question back to the user. So you can basically see that CLAUDE.md file as sort of like a system prompt or an instruction layer that tells your AI agent how the vault or your folder is structured and where to retrieve and save data. So as you can see in this session with Claude Cowork, where we wrote the LinkedIn post, it has access to one file, which is the instructions or the CLAUDE.md. And this is basically just instructions for the AI agent on where to find specific information in the second brain and where to save it. So you can see how this system works, the file structure, knowledge routing, and this same CLAUDE.md file or the instructions you also see here in the Obsidian Vault. Now, don't worry, I'll show you later in this video exactly how to get to this CLAUDE.md and how to set up these instructions easily. Now, you might be asking, how is this actually different from Claude's built-in memory, and why would we actually need Obsidian if it's just a folder? Now, first of all, Claude's built-in memory is very limited and is basically designed to remember the most essential facts about you. It's generally stored in one document, so the difference really is the scope all of the context. My Obsidian Vault, as you can see, has thousands of pieces of context. And secondly, if Obsidian is just a folder, why would we need Obsidian? The short answer is you don't need it. You can set this up in a folder yourself too, but honestly, it's just a nice way for you to visualize, organize, navigate, search, and link your notes and files together. My context and knowledge sources over the last weeks have been growing really fast. And honestly, without Obsidian, I wouldn't be able to organize it the way that I have right now. Through the graph view, we can also see the relationships between all of these context files. It automatically makes these connections between different documents or context files. For example, in the brand identity document, you can see that we have the voice positioning where it links to the ICP for our ideal customer profile and the pain points of our customer. This is also what your AI agent is able to navigate. So for example, if it reads the brand guidelines and feels like it needs more context around my ICP, you can see this link or wiki link, what they call it, and actually look up this document to find more information. And the nice thing about Obsidian is I can really easily sync the updated context across my team if you're going to use this in a team setting. It's also entirely free to use and download, so I just recommend using it. Now, before showing you how to set it up, let me zoom out for 1 second because I think this setup has much bigger implications than just some extra productivity. I think it could entirely change the way people work and businesses are run. So there are multiple of these big developments coming together right now in AI. Everyone can see that these LLMs are becoming better at reasoning, MCPs are getting better and now allow them to efficiently navigate softwares and the internet, and skills, plugins, scheduled tasks, etc. now allow you to automate repetitive tasks fast and easily. But the missing layer for those AI agents was really context. And with a setup like this, I think it will slowly allow people and businesses to start adopting an AI interface like Claude Cowork or Claude Code as the main interface to do their work, instead of hopping between 15 different softwares all the time. But maybe more importantly, I think this is the development that will slowly allow AI agents to start doing work autonomously without our involvement. Personally, for example, since I've really started using Cowork on a daily basis, I've been less and less in my Gmail inbox. I've been less on Google doing research. I'm barely in my CRM anymore. And now with these combination of MCPs, connectors, and scheduled skills, I can now automate end-to-end processes like email follow-ups without my involvement. And that's why I really believe you need to start building this today, because the value of this setup isn't in the setup itself, it's in the context that builds over time. Every decision that gets logged, every correction or rule that gets saved, every project that gets documented, and every skill that gets made, it all compounds. So the AI agent you and your entire team have after 6 months of using this is far more powerful than the one you start with on day one. And if your competitor, for example, starts 6 months after you, they're not just behind on the tool, they're behind on 6 months of intelligence that makes the tool actually perform far better for you. And even when better models come out, and they will, the same context just becomes more powerful. So the context, I think, will be your actual moat in the upcoming months and years. So how do you actually set this up for yourself or your business? Now, the key thing to keep in mind when you get started is that you don't want to over optimize. It might look very overwhelming what I just showed you in my own setup, but this setup I started with just probably 5 files a few weeks ago. This context will grow very naturally the more you use AI. You just want to sort of start very simple and let the system evolve naturally. The same is the case for the file structure. It is important, but you do want to start simple and let it evolve naturally. There is really no perfect file structure because it's going to be highly context dependent. It will depend on your context, your business, your goals, and your projects. Now, that being said, there are 2 file structures that I recommend and I've seen work well as a starting file structure. One for if you're running a business, and you want to use this across your team, and one if you want to use this for yourself as a professional or as a solopreneur. Now, I'll go over the file structure quickly so you understand what's in each, because it is important. But we've also built a plugin you can use in your AI agent on Claude Cowork or Claude Code to help you set up and get to these starting structures fast, which I'll show you in a second how to use. And second, what you want to keep in mind when I'm going through this is that many of these files are and can be created by your AI agent. So don't get overwhelmed. You'll get there naturally. So I'll cover the file structure that I use for my business setup, and then I'll show you quickly the personal setup, which is basically the same but with less files. So first we have the context folder, and this is where you store general context around who you are, your business, your strategy, your team, your brand, and it's basically everything your AI agent needs to understand about you and your situation always. For example, in context, I have information about my team, strategy, stakeholders, pain points, organization, operator, the ICP, and the brand. Second, we have daily, and this is basically where your AI agent logs everything that happened each day across your sessions, maybe across your meetings. And this is probably the most important one because it gives your AI agent that continuity between conversations. Then third, we have departments. Now, this is if you run a business, you will of course have different departments. For example, in my case, community, content, engineering, partnerships, operations, etc. And then in the community folder, for example, we can have SOPs around work that needs to be done in my community. For example, here, YouTube to community repurposing. The fourth one is intelligence, and this is a bit like the first one, context, but much more detailed. And this is the place where things like meeting transcripts, decisions, competitor research, market insights get stored over time. Then we have onboarding. Here you can have SOPs around onboarding new team members or even clients. Then we have projects here. Now, projects will highly depend on your context. For me, projects can be, for example, different YouTube videos I'm working on. So I can ideate and work on scripting on one video between different chats. If you run an agency, this can be a project for each client you're managing, but this will be highly context dependent. Then fifth, we have resources, and resources is basically anything reusable. So you can imagine it like a library of prompts, templates, frameworks, maybe content output examples, good examples, things like this. Then we have the skill folder, an important one, where the reference material of your skills live. For example, your strategy docs, your voice guides, your ICP descriptions, basically additional information that your skills point to. So you can see I have all my skills here with the reference files laid out. By the way, if you want access to all of the skills that me and my team are building out and using, you can also check out my AI Accelerator in the link in the description. Then lastly, we have here tasks, and tasks can basically be to-do lists. And then we have teams with more context around each team member's role and responsibilities in your business. So your agent always has context around anyone in your team. And that's really it. And then at the root here, you have the CLAUDE.md file, the brain file, which is the instruction layer that tells your AI agent how this whole file system here works and how to navigate it. And this will also appear in the CoWork section in their folder instruction that I showed you before. Now, if you're setting this up for yourself as a solopreneur or maybe as a professional, you can basically have the same structure, but a little bit simpler. So here I have an example of the personal OS. It's basically the same file structure without the department, without the team section, and without the onboarding. So same file structure, just a bit simpler. Now again, might look overwhelming, but I started this a few weeks ago with just 5 files, and this sort of naturally grew, and a lot of this context has been created by my AI agent. And the plugin we built is going to make this process a lot easier and faster to do. So how do we set it up? You can just go to Obsidian and download Obsidian for free. Once you've done that, you will land on a screen like this. So you can just go here to create new vault. For example, I call it Ben AI test. And then I have to choose a folder. So I just create a new folder, and this is the folder that you're going to point CoWork or Claude Code or any AI agent you use towards to access that same vault that Obsidian visualizes for you. So we open this one and click create. So we now have an empty folder. Now, if you're going to set this up in Claude Code, you can also use Obsidian CLI, which I'll make sure to put in the description below, that can help you get to a basic generic setup a bit quicker. But as said, we've built our own plugin, which is available in my AI Accelerator together with all our other plugins and skills to get you to that file structure that I showed you before a lot quicker. It helps you also populate your essential context a lot faster. And this plugin will work across Claude CoWork or Claude Code, wherever you want to use it. So if that's interesting to you, you can check it out in my AI Accelerator in the link in the description below. We also have unlimited one-on-one live tech help available if you want some help setting up these things. We also do AI workshops where we dive a lot deeper into these setups and tools. So if that's interesting, definitely check it out. Also, if you're a business and you want me and my team to help you in a more personalized way to set up a business AI OS for your company, we're now opening a few limited spots to help businesses set this up. So if you want more information, you can also check the link in the description below. In there, you can find a link with the marketplace of plugins and skills of my accelerator. And from there, if you do it in CoWork, you can just go to customize, click here on the plus, and you click add marketplace, and you add the link that you find in the accelerator. Once you've done that and you go to browse plugins, you'll find a tab here at personal that says Ben AI Skills. And in there at the bottom, you'll find our plugin, Ben AI Obsidian plugin. You can install that. And now you'll see that in your plugins, this one will appear. And there we have the skills that help you get to that setup in Obsidian a lot faster. And all we do then is we point CoWork to the same folder that we just set up in Obsidian. So in this case, Ben AI test. We click always allow. And now we use the plugin and the skill setup. Right, we run this and it will walk you through the setup on getting to this file structure a lot faster. And I'll start asking you some questions to get the essential context set up. So first it asks me what kind of vault do I want, a business setup or a solopreneur setup. So in this case, I'll do solopreneur just to show you as an example. So now it's already created the initial folder structure and the CLAUDE.md with the instructions on how to navigate this type of folder structure. As you can see now in Obsidian, we already have this folder structure. Now, most of these are still empty, of course, because we haven't given Claude any context. So the next question is to really start giving it context, right? And that's what this plugin does, right? It's going to ask you some questions to populate your initial context data set. Now, want to spend probably half an hour to an hour here to get your initial setup, have the initial context data set, and from there, it will naturally expand. And I can tell you, if you start using AI more and more, in a couple of weeks, you'll have a very expanded data set of context that really makes your AI far more powerful. So a couple of important things to keep in mind once you get to that initial data set is every new task you start in Claude Code, Claude Cowork, you always want to point towards that same folder. Second, when there are things that you want your AI or your second brain to remember, clearly tell Claude Cowork to remember this in your second brain or whatever you call your folder. If you can, ideally even point it to the specific file it has to save that role to. Thirdly, if you see it have issues navigating the folder structure, tell it to update the CLAUDE.md, which you can also do yourself, because remember, this is the bridge to point it to the right direction. So I can add in rules all the way at the end here too. You can see I've already added some rules on how it should navigate the folder structure. And then lastly, if you're going to build skills, I highly recommend to take a new approach now. And instead of embedding reference files into the skill here in Claude Cowork or in Claude Code, save the reference files in your second brain and let the skill point towards the right folders. You can also adapt your old skills by just telling Claude. For example, here I said, can you adapt my LinkedIn skill and create a new skill, and gave it here a specific instruction. Instead of having the reference files in the skill, point towards the files in the Ben AI OS to get the additional info instead of having them saved in the skill. And again, the earlier you start with this, the more powerful your AI agent is going to get over the long term. So highly recommend to start soon with this. Now, that's it for this video. If you're still watching, first of all, congrats. And second of all, thanks for sticking with me for so long. Again, if you want access to some of the skills and plugins that I've shown in this course, of course, you can check out my AI Accelerator in the link in the description below, where we list them all out. We also do multiple AI workshops and Q&As every week to dive a lot deeper into these tools and setups. We have unlimited one-on-one live tech help available to help you resolve any issues you might have when setting this up for yourself, and a great community of professionals, business owners, and department leaders. So if that's interesting to you, you can check it out in the link in the description below. Also, if you got any value out of this video, I really highly appreciate a like and a subscribe. It really does help me. Thanks again for watching. And if you want to learn more about AI and Claude, you can check out the video here above.